I'm asking Mark to approach the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed the lunch. We are looking for you to take a seat so that we can start. Now you have done your part of the workshop, you have done the shop, now it's time to work. I would like to repeat that this is now the time of the discussion on the scheme. In few seconds, I will ask Mark Buiting of FMO to introduce the scheme that has been discussed and prepared. And this is the proposal on the table. The purpose of this afternoon and tomorrow morning breakout sessions will be, in fact, to beef up the proposal, make it feasible. May I ask people to take a seat, please? Thank you. So that the proposal really takes off. It has been a certain work, and I wanted to also say that you will have a possibility also to send written comments. I would invite you to send written comments so that my team can look at them and try to incorporate in what will be then the scheme, because here before you we will present a proposal. Now, if you see the program, you will see that after the presentation there is immediately a panel. In fact, I will, after the presentation, ask the panelists to come on stage, and the first tour of the panel will be, in fact, to react to the proposal. This is very important, so that even from where you are, you can see the tone of the discussion. We'll be really trying to pointing out what it works, what it doesn't. And we have selected a range of partners, from CSOs, representatives, to people of the industry again, to financiers and donors. So, with no further ado, and in perfect time, I would like to ask Mark Buiting from FMO. FMO is the Dutch EDFI. He has been helping us to shape this proposal, as the proposal must be a proposal that works. And therefore, I will leave to him. How long will be the presentation, Mark? Maximum half an hour, but I will perhaps ask him to make it 25, so that you don't have the temptation to relax. Thank you very much, and up to Mark now for the proposal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Could the presentation be? Yeah. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I represent the European DFIs. In specific, FMO. We've been involved in drafting the grant proposal as being discussed today. We fully realize that there's a huge finance potential ahead of us in rural electrification. We come from private sector involvement, but mostly grid connected. this presentation will make at least an attempt in what we think might be the business models that could be financed at a larger scale, and as well how that translates to what we thought the facility would look like. So I'll first start with the background of Africa, energy in Africa or the developing countries. The private sector involvement, and that's mostly then the European DFIs, to which we don't reckon directly KfW and Agence Gaz de France. They're more public sector oriented. So if you really take only the private sector, then there hasn't been much activity altogether. This is a little bit outdated table, but until the end of 2013, only 30 sizable energy projects have been realized all over Africa, which is not much. But what we see at the moment is there's a huge increase in developers and interest coming from the South African renewable energy program. The bidding and the diverse renewable energy rounds have been ongoing since, I believe, 3-4 years now. That has led to a lot of new developers, in addition to the OECD countries that sort of fell away with the subsidies, a decreasing solar power cost, and many mandates, increased mandates to deliver renewable energy to the private sector, DFIs. So what we expect, but that's on the private sector DFI perspective, is we'll expect in most developing countries, and in specific in Africa, easily 3 to 4 solar PV grid-connected projects. But in addition to that, similar waves on replacement of diesel gensets by solar solutions, containerized solutions, for example. We're getting almost weekly now proposals. And in addition to that, off-grid solutions. We see 3 waves simultaneously. We are fully aware that there is not a silver bullet to energy in specific in Africa. We understand there's a lack of syndrome for the DFIs, these projects, and then if I speak about the off-grid solutions, they're mostly too small. It's an area we've almost neglected. I believe FMO itself, my employer, we're involved in 2 or 3 very small off-grid projects. But they've been too small so far. But from the industry and from drafting the proposal, we understand there's a lot of lack of other lack-offs like equity. There's a lack of developers. Personally, I believe there's a complete lack of bankability skills made available, and all these add up to very low development of rural grid-connected as well projects. The concept for Electrify, therefore, is to try to overcome most of these obstacles mentioned with a start of 75 million euros development grant facility, and development grant facility to make the EU a partnership to these projects, take the highest risk position, but in a revolving manner, in a way that the monies can go back, and therefore the ultimate product is a subordinated loan. But again, a subordinated loan to avoid having the European Commission, or who will act on its behalf, the manager, will not end up in board seats, will not have valuation issues, will not have dispute settlement arrangements, etc. With a convertible grant, it's possible to enter transactions very early. Any other instrument will require that the other parties, the senior debt, other subordinated debt, etc., would already be known and available upfront. And a convertible grant is risk capital, does not need to wait till all the other documents and arrangements are in place. Therefore, the EU really expects to become a partner to any of the initiatives financed through this grant mechanism. 2 steps back, the rural off-grid market has different business models compared to the original sort of IPP model. And we don't have the silver bullet, nobody has, but we're all here together to see what kind of directions we need to take. So hence 2 steps back on what is bankability from a private sector bank perspective. If you take a block of Lego, financing a project is much similar. It follows a pattern. Any bank first starts with either the country risk is too high, or the exposure in a certain country is too high, or another reason, but if the country itself is already a no-go, the project is not bankable for that bank. Similar to the market economics. FMO until recently can be involved in coal-fired. We don't do it anymore, but from a market economics perspective, that made a lot of sense. Because you can always the least cost supplier, and it stabilized the grid, it increased the renewable energy opportunities as well. A third building block is the project economics. We've been looking at the first round, South Africa. We are also involved, but really comfortable on 28.5 euro cents, whilst the second round is 12 to 14 euro cents. That is not a project economics and the market we would like to see. Contract structure in project finance follows a certain pattern which can be very much standardized. Security package as well, and obviously any project needs a sponsor with sufficient equity, and to that last block the EU now has come to the table. That whole piece needs to be structured. So from a bankability matrix, and this is the matrix that needs to be transformed somehow to the off-grid market. It looks like this. I'll leave this for you to read later, but these are the building blocks the banks will follow. Whatever project you bring to a bank, they'll always follow the same blocks implicitly or explicitly, but you can always get them somewhere in these 6 pillars. The pity in Africa is that there are only very few banks active in the private sector. And then in specific in relation to long-term funding. So we've seen the lack of long-term funding. A couple of sheets further, I'll show what long-term funding will do. But long-term funding is the domain of a very few banks, the DFIs, the European DFIs in Africa. Whatever the starting point is in any project on the project economics, it should be globally competitive. And that is a link to why long-term funding is needed. Yes, you can replace PV of diesel by PV, but it touches upon the issue mentioned this morning as well. Why should I pay more for my electricity whilst 30 kilometers further someone else gets it cheaper because they're able to attract 18-year funding? Therefore, whatever we do, the global competitive drive on tariffs is a starting point. It all starts with probably the first lesson we had on math, secondary school. There is not a book on bankability. It differs per bank. I like very much the information made available by the European Investment Bank on its website. They've made an attempt to make it transparent. What is bankable? There are very few others that can give you directions. You can walk in a bank and walk out still not having a clue what would make your venture bankable. But understanding a little bit the thought is obviously it's easier for a banker to analyze one borrower versus n borrowers. and borrowers, if that's the whole nation taking your electricity, you're not able to analyze. One utility you can analyze, whether or not that utility is profit-making, but at least you're able to analyze. The same for all the other categories, whereas the end user and the banks available obviously have the counter categorization on bankability. You like more banks because that proves it's bankable, and also you like more end users because that proves there's demand. If you do it well on renewable energy, and you can look at most European countries, you can look at South Africa now, you can bundle later on, you can securitize assets, you can leverage on renewable energy projects very much. So whatever you do, when you do it right from the beginning, will yield huge impacts in the future. So if I make a step now to off-grid solutions, this is the impact of long-term funding. If a project would tender to obtain a license with 10-year funding, that's to the right, and another project would have access to DFI money, and that's often available until and including 18 years, that's to the left, then the project with 10 years is having to increase its tariff by 25% as from the beginning, and the example is a flat tariff, which is easily understandable. The 10-year need to be repaid in 10 years, and the loan otherwise in 18 years. So it's key for the lowest cost electricity to get the DFIs in, to get the 18 years type of funding. To do so, you would like to deviate as little as possible from what the DFIs have as a mindset. And if you have a sliding puzzle, you move towards an area of off-grid solutions where the business models are very diverse, not very proven yet, then that will not lead to very easy adaptation with the banks. They wait till one of the business models or more business models are hammered out. They all come from, I skipped this one, that's just for reading on the business models. But all the banks come from this model. They're all used to one IPP model, derived from the late 80s, when the US had a shortage of electricity, allowed by law to have IPPs deliver private sector generated electricity, followed a certain model, 40% equity, 60% debt. And that was exported by Enron and by AES to the emerging world, emerging markets, later on to other sectors, etc. And all banks now and all bankers follow this model. They like to see one borrower. There's obviously a certain group syndicate of banks involved and equity providers. They like to see one off-taker they can analyze. They like to see one guarantor on the obligations of the off-taker. And then obviously, as a result, there are end beneficiaries for the electricity. But this model, every banker has in mind. And yeah, you can deviate a lot from it, but then you will never get the long-term funding in. So the solutions we're looking for should be as close as to this business model, at least as a start. The models we've been analyzing is obviously a very easy one, the load replacement model. We do see these opportunities very often now. We're being approached by this model, which is simply a solar PV container with batteries that is able to replace the diesel generated power from a brewery or from a hospital or something. Another model, and that's where Mr. Ridolfi made reference to, where we expect more from, because you can add a grid to it, is the angle load model. Should also be the same brewery, for example, But given the means to enlarge the access to energy by, for example, financing the grid from the facility proposed today, and therewith connecting a village to the network of the brewery. Discussed this morning as well, energy service company model. Actually, the ideal situation would be a Pan-African regional utility financed by donor countries, and that utility would sort of roll out the rural electrification. As long as it is done as a corporate, we think it may be bankable as well. Electrify. There is a focus in this presentation on projects. If you look what has been achieved on renewable energy, it's almost completely through projects. So therefore, banks have a strong focus on projects. Nevertheless, corporates are not excluded. It is meant to be Electrify, to cover all developing countries, with a strong focus initially on Africa. We expect that solar will be key. 80 to 90% of the material probably going through Electrify will be solar-based, and it makes most sense. So, Electrify will make available convertible grants at a very early stage. That is really development capital. It will make available either junior loan, which is subordinated debt directly, or it can help, but that's in a project case, to end up to provide contingent equity for completion support of projects. At a corporate level, it can take simply direct subordinated loans. We've decided so, since for the European Commission, as compared to equity solutions, it's a much better proposition with a natural exit possibility. The complexity is moderate. It can be made available very early. You don't have to wait for all the contracts to be signed, and the catalyzation is extremely high. Some terms and conditions, as also in the paper distributed. I probably only want to emphasize on the conversion element. It's likely that the project will convert upon reaching financial close. So you convert the grant when the other finance documents are signed. At corporate level, it's probably convertible upon reaching of certain solvency ratios. So you have a healthy business. Nevertheless, that is to be sorted out and to be proposed as well by the manager to be appointed. The organizational setup will be that Electrify will steer a management to be appointed, and long-term financing debt will be linked to the whole mechanism. At FMO, we've had experience working with convertible grants since roughly 10 years, and if there's one lesson learned, it is the hookup of senior debt should not be underestimated. Should not be well. That's most important. Senior debt need to be on the table. Otherwise, you should not provide convertible grants. And the senior debt does not need to be signed. It can be committed through a fund that always will be available. It can be a group of banks that always will be available if a project is structured in the same manner. But it should be there. What is key as well to Electrify is that it will work as a center of excellence. Electrify will have the manager make the arranging services available that are not available in the market, or at least not available to the extent people would wish for. And that means that the manager will perform the duties of arranging, preparing an info memo, have a model made available, the whole risk allocation, the contractual setup, standardized to the extent possible. As just an example, you would not like to have 20 projects out of 40 countries, 800 models analyzed by any bank. So you can standardize, you can put it all in one model. These exist, 25 projects in one. You'll have them with the developers, and it all comes standardized back to such a unit as Electrify. Electrify will work with long-dated providers. It's not yet decided, but the ADVs are very interested in bringing a structural solution, and they're also interested in thinking along with the European Commission to provide the managerial services. It's also expected that Electrify obviously will not work isolated, that all the other programs will fit in as well in whatever Electrify will do. In the hope that Electrify is able to increase the risk capital, which is lacking at the moment, will provide long-term debt and therewith as well the number of players of long-term debt, that there will be a standardization to the extent possible to scale the rural electrification initiatives. Through the structuring, arranging and advising skills made available, enlarge tremendously the number of projects, and we believe that the other programs will help taking care of getting the proper regulatory regime. In realization, the whole program is intended to be launched probably the second, maybe already the first, but I think realistically the second quarter of next year. And no doubt the project eligibility and application will already be announced prior to that. I think Electrify will work as a call for proposal type of mechanism. So prior to Q2 next year, that will be announced how it will work. There will also be, in addition, until implementation, further roles for the manager. There's an expectation that the real beneficiaries of Electrify and the rural electrification are also the industries, the lighting industry, computers, mobile phones. So it's expected that the manager will start a dialogue with these institutions whether or not they would want to increase the convertible grant facility. And further, that was already touched upon as well this morning. I personally expect a lot from crowdfunding. I established my own company in crowdfunding as 1-3 Capital, first to third world. And we're in talks with Cities Energy that is financed by the European Commission to come up with a European based crowdfunding platform, overcoming the diverse regulations, and we hope to be able to hook in with them. I noticed during the day that future events needs to be announced when you're done with the presentation. So I would like to bring to your attention 30th of October, Solar Plaza in London, on a worldwide, worldwide crowdfunding event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, man. Okay, now I think we start the Mark. If you stay on the scene, it's not finished yet. Thank you very much. Can I call now Mr. Dr. Kande Junkella? Director General Adnan Amin. Mr. Dean Cooper, Head of Energy Finance Unit in UNEP. Marcus Wiman, Secretary General from ARE, Alliance for Rural Electrification. Philip Mann, UI PDF, replacing my ex-cat who unfortunately couldn't make it. Thanks a lot. Then CEO Johannes Vandenberg, South African Wind Energy Association. Then Mr. Colm Peters, Secretary General of Global Off-Grid Lighting Association. Pedro Neves from EDP. And Paolo Dieci from CISP. And also Roberto Ridolfi, who is going to do the moderator of the, of the session.
There is no chair. Thank you for the chair. Well, we have a star panel. The only problem is, you can see what is the problem with this panel. Only men. Yeah. But we will compensate with the questions from the floor, only women. And the nasty ones. I'm sorry, this is not deliberate, and as you can see, we didn't check. But dear panelists, this is really a star panel, as usual. There is now something very concrete on the table. So, in a free order, and ubi maior minor cessat, meaning that the free order applies only after Kande Junkella and Adnan Amin, then I think it will be a reaction to what you have just heard. Just a quick reaction, and perhaps, Mark, when there are questions, you can pick up the slide where there could be questions. The material, I hope, is distributed or will be distributed. And as I repeat, what we cannot manage here with questions will be done also in writing. So we will expect to receive emails, inputs from all of you. But now is the question of reactions to what you heard. Reactions in many, many terms. Feasibility, it works, doesn't work, implicates the public, the private, the business, the banks, the civic society organization, the local authorities. Where is that you see good things, where is that you see potential problems and areas for improvement? This is the essence of the workshop. So, Your Excellency, Dr. Juncker.
Thank you very much. Well, it has to be seen in the context of the other support that the EU is providing, and so I feel this comes in at the right time to fill a gap. Remember that you are already supporting through EU Technical Assistance Facility a number of countries already now to begin to build capacity internally for the public sector reform work they need to do in the energy sector. You're also now, through your assistance, beginning to identify some projects. So I believe this facility comes at the right time, and the timing to roll it out next year is really on the mark, because by then we're very confident that through some of the work that is already going on through the technical assistance facility of the EU, but also some of the bilateral support we're beginning to see come from some of the EU member states, and some of the work that the World Bank and African Development Bank are already doing, that there could be projects in the pipeline by that second quarter that can benefit from this. Of course, what we need to complement this, a lot of capacity building, to have the energy entrepreneurs on the other side, in the markets where we want to deploy this. So if you ask me what's wrong with this panel here, apart from not having females, I would have loved sitting here, not Jumkela, but African energy entrepreneurs. Because at the end of the day, so I want to emphasize capacity building for that entrepreneurship. If we're going to target off-grid, some of the off-grid solutions or mini-grid solutions in rural Africa, I really believe we should also have technical assistance support for those African entrepreneurs who want to be energy entrepreneurs. I would love to see African energy, renewable energy marketers. I would love to see the repair guys on the table here saying, fine, my business model is to repair those solar panels and the inverters when they break down. Because I know that's a need. But here's a facility. They can develop a business model because you need that support structure. So going forward, I hope the TA facility will include some capacity building for those entrepreneurs, and there are many who are looking now at the opportunities they see in East Africa or in India, where entrepreneurs now are beginning to start their own companies linked to digital mobile payment systems to be the energy entrepreneurs. But I love what I saw. I'm very happy. It's filling an important gap here.
Thank you. Adnan.
Thank you, Roberto. And let me say, we really welcome this initiative. We know this is a moment of tremendous opportunity, especially in Africa, and the need for solutions on innovative financing to address the kind of bottlenecks we have is going to be critical. And this looks like a very innovative and interesting tool. And let's just step back and look at what is the opportunity. Why is this important? We launched in New York with Kande the African Clean Energy Corridor. It's bringing together the countries of the East and Southern African power pool. We have a situation in Africa where growth has been sustained for over a decade. Africa is transforming economically. Huge infrastructure investment is coming on stream, and energy demand is going to triple by 2030, which is our target for doubling renewable energy. And in that period of time, we're going to have a fast-growing middle class with high consumption needs and energy demand, as well as a very fast urbanization process. Unless we crack the issue of sustainable energy, we are going to have very serious development and environment problems down the road with Africa. The good news is the countries have signed up to this, now at heads of state level in New York. Arrangements are in place. I see a number of our partners here. I see Professor Al-Misri from NEPAD also with us. We really think that this is going to happen if we are able to leverage private sector investment. Public financing is nowhere near enough for the level of ambition that we're looking at. Leveraging private sector investment requires new financing models because the current models of financing that we have are not delivering returns. They're not flexible enough. They have unrealistic levels of risk and cost associated with them. And we don't yet have enough experience of structuring finance for renewable energy investment, much of it which comes up front. So an extremely important initiative. I think you're doing it the right way. Start with 75 million. It's not going to change the world overnight, but what it could do is create a transformative idea of how do you use subsidiary financing to really de-risk and reduce cost of investment. So we think it's a great idea. The couple of things that I would suggest. One, like Kande, I think entrepreneurship is going to be critical. We have been doing a series of capacity building efforts in Africa and in Asia, to create a new kind of flow of entrepreneurial activity. We see a lot of entrepreneurs, but there's not enough knowledge or capacity in terms of how do you use institutional mechanisms that are existing, how do you access finance, how do you build a business model, how do you get bankability in your project, and so on. Now, that is growing. So entrepreneurs are developing, but that needs to be ramped up quite seriously. The second is, what are the mechanisms for disbursement of this money? I think an issue was raised earlier this morning that, if this is going to be through the usual state mechanisms, then the usual transaction costs and administrative delays are going to hamper the ambition of this initiative. I think you've said, and I agree with you, that we minimize bureaucracy, but if you consider me as a friend, and I can have a little friendly criticism, the European Commission procedures are often quite cumbersome, and the reality is that we are seeing a lot of countries today that are looking for other sources of financing, including low-cost commercial financing that is available, rather than go to big established multilaterals and bilaterals. That's a fact of life. If you want to change that, you have to change the way you manage this money and the way you disperse this money and the way you develop accountability frameworks. If it's going to be the same old business, then we'll have some problems in getting results. Another issue that I would raise is the question of aggregation. We've been talking a lot about the fact that we're going to get impact if we are able to aggregate the level of activity that we are planning. You're not going to be able to finance small projects and administer them over the lifetime of this facility. You need to have some ability to do that, and we need a mechanism of how do we bring together and bundle projects together with how we create this new innovative financing model. And I think that is where we need to get some traction on scale. If we don't have scale, again, we're going to fall short of the target that we need. My final comment is that, like many others, we have all been looking up to this point at a project-by-project approach. And that's a lot of our discourse, even here today. This project works, those were the conditions on that project, and so on. That's fine. We've got a lot of experience through the project approach, but unless we have a much more holistic whole-of-economy approach to energy and the integration of renewable energy and energy access objectives into that strategy, we're not going to get the kind of impact that we want to do. So the idea behind the Clean Energy Corridor Initiative is really to develop that institutional framework where we have a regional market. We're working with the regulators. I know a couple of them are here. We're working with the regulators to create the basis for a regulated East and Southern African market. The interconnectors are under construction. They're being built today. We're doing a lot of zoning work in terms of guiding future transmission. But once this structure is in place, how we're going to finance the transition at scale is going to be the real challenge, and that's where the test is going to be for your facility. My final point, that we have our own facility that we're running. It's very low cost, it's very direct with project developers, but I think that we would very much appreciate the possibility to discuss how we can twin our Abu Dhabi fund facility, which I think is going to grow in the near future quite substantially, with the kind of innovative approach you can bring, which can also help to de-risk investment with the kind of pre-feasibility activities that you are talking about. I feel like this should be some kind of a beauty contest because of the wonderful audience and the lineup. We're not wearing anything except suits, but I would have loved to have a few more women here also. And you being an Italian, I have to say, you know, you didn't do your job this time.
Thank you, thank you. But thank you for the comments. Thank you, and I repeat, I apologize for the bad gender balance. My friend from UNEP.
Thank you very much. I've got far too much to say, so I'm going to try to pull out some of the highlights, but really to sort of focus a little bit on the practical application of any sort of fund that we put in place, so we can learn the lessons of the past and put in place structures now that are going to reflect those lessons. So we welcome very much Electrify, and it reflects very much our own thinking on this, particularly relating to the Clean Energy Mini-Grids program that I'm managing, where constantly the barrier we face is this little segment of financing between 1 and 10 million euro, which is, as we all know, too small for the main banks to get involved. The transaction costs are not worthwhile. It's too big for the usual donor project. So it's a great initiative to address exactly that focus, which we're very pleased to look at that. Now, when I say it reflects our own thinking, let me just recap a little bit to give myself a bit of credibility in this process. Our own thinking, well, in rural electrification goes back 10, 15 years, long before I was involved with UNEP. But clean energy mini-grids, that specific focus, really was initiated, I remember quite well, the end of 2011, there was a Powering Africa Strategy Summit in Cape Town in South Africa. One of many at the time, but it was significant because it was an invite-only, high-level, public and private sector that representatives were putting both views, and the united consensus from that meeting was that mini-grids should be a focus. So this is back in 2011, before the IEA, the WA report came out, to say that mini-grids were going to be a key to future electrification. So since then, we've been through the usual handle turning of any international organization. We've looked at the assessment issues. We've tried to prepare some relevant program activities. One of the questions is that if there's so much potential, there's so much demand for these mini-grids, why is it not scaling up? That was the key issue at that time. And of course, we went through the process and decided that the key factor is risk. And risk for the investor often amounts to uncertainty. It's really trying to put these things in place on the ground under local conditions in a way that people can see can be successful. We wanted to show the commercial viability of the operation of these activities. So certainly public and private sector funding was a key element, but a measure of success as far as we were concerned is when the public sector can pull out of that process and the market will continue. There are too many examples in our experience of public sector programs that come into a country where there's a nascent market for new technology development. And in fact, that market is undermined totally by the new structures that come into place. So we have to be very careful when we're implementing any new initiative of what is the local situation. I think it's been mentioned here, it's not just about the local authorities' contact, the local stakeholders, it's the traditional authorities, the traditional leaders. How does that process really work? So we can sit here in Brussels on our panel and we can talk about what we think is going to be the best application based on our international experience. But certainly we should be asking, I think the lady in the audience mentioned in the first session, we should be asking the people on the ground in the communities, where is the demand going to be coming from? And what are the requirements there? Talking about risk, the professor from HNU, I think, mentioned earlier some of the key elements. We're talking about political risk. I think people are aware of that. And that is an issue that needs to be taken into account. Payment risk is another key issue, is what mechanisms can we put in place which are going to be appropriate for people to pay? Access to the money is one thing. Payment of those funds back in a way that's socially acceptable on the ground is going to be a key issue. So this is just broad factors to take into account. I mean, our programs have gone looking at, we've divided it up really into sort of brownfield and greenfield. So we've looked at the different elements. Some of the key lessons, which I think we need to take into account in the program, one is it's not only about finance. Finance means we need the technology. We need the needs assessment to match the requirements. We need the policy frameworks. We need the capacity on the ground. I think we're all familiar with that. Most importantly, it's also the other sectors, the other issues which need to be taken into account to assess the full value of what we're doing. It's not just about finance, the numbers in the book. It's about the economic benefit, the social benefit, the environmental benefit. We've got to look at the full development benefit value, which is often overlooked by the bankers, who will say bankability of the project is a key issue, and we need to work out what the returns are. So we need a mechanism, a facility which will look at that broad scope, and I think the Electrify has that in mind. Public and private sector for commercial viability is a key issue. It's also a question of looking at, can we develop the systems on the ground that provide the local government can give us that public sector funding, so that when we've terminated the program, we don't, as I said, undermine the market. We actually have a facility in place that the public sector element can be taken over by the local institutions. A number of other issues I would perhaps come into the discussion on the risks. There are lots of issues to talk about. I think a big focus is the customer. And we talk about mini-grids, and this is one of the criticisms that we've had. We talk about, let's finance a mini-grid and we get the right sort of components and the risk factors. But what do we do about Mr. and Mrs. Undlovu who live on the wrong side of the track from the mini-grid, and they're now not going to get connected, whereas everybody else in their village is going to be connected? And then we get that social disruption as a result. So we've got to understand maybe the mini-grids in isolation is not the right approach. We should look at other activities, standalone systems, as well as mini-grids having the same sort of tariff, the same sort of structures, so that the community will accept this new development. And that's something I think we often don't look at, is what is the... We use bottom-up too much, but bottom-up I think is a key issue here. We've got to understand what the real needs are. I was going to go through a number of other issues. I just wanted to come on to just a couple of specific points about the facility itself, because as many people will know, UNEP's already partnered with EIB in preparing the Renewable Energy Performance Platform under SE for All. And REP has a similar operational structure to the concept of the Electrify. So it's basically a platform manager mandated to support projects in the development, in securing the required financing and risk mitigation instruments. Besides REP, UNEP has other activities. SCAF, I think, has been mentioned in the introduction. So the Seed Capital Assistance Facility that's working with private equity funds to provide early stage financing. Good lessons can be learnt from that. So overall, we think the Electrify initiative looks very promising. I mean, it looks it's well timed. The features in there look very good. Having said that, we think that the role of the Electrify manager, it seems clear in the sense of sourcing projects, know your customer checks, the market sounding, the project development. But we think as well the role needs to be, apart from a detailed description, I think the rest of the document sort of focuses on the contingent grants as the main tool to be employed through Electrify. Now, UNEP, and I think in consultation with colleagues at EIB, think that contingent grants certainly are a valuable tool to that process, but they must be applied as part of a much broader support strategy. So we're feeling that needs to be, the contextual part of it is important. So the broader strategy really starts with the manager providing the support to the projects in terms of structuring the proposals, working to bring other existing sources of financing and risk mitigation. So it's not just about the direct funding support. We think that the mandate of the manager, I'm sorry, I'm taking too long. We think the mandate of the manager really should be part of the technical assistance program. It's about sort of helping to develop the project pipeline as well. I have a number of other bits on here. Perhaps the one thing I should just mention is, the experience we have from SCAF is really having the private equity fund managers we've worked through for SCAF. So when they're trying to develop these pipelines and to develop the financing, there is a motivation of the fund manager themselves. So they're actually vested interests in that process. But as I say, I can come on to more details as we discuss, and thanks for bearing with me on that.
Thank you. Dean, you have been very naughty, because I asked really to comment on the proposal, go inside. We had the time to float experiences. Now go inside, as you have done in the last part of your intervention. Marcus, from the industry.
Thank you, Roberto. Thank you that you have all taken the time to come to Brussels. This is really a sincere pleasure to have you all here to discuss all this. Before starting with my comments on Electrify itself, I would also like to thank Mark Whiting for good cooperation, because we had some good exchange before and in a consultation process with the Commission to bring it to the level achieved, which is a big effort because it's just a completely different approach we are trying to achieve here, and not only being based on grant as in the past demonstration project. So it's a lot of consultation within the private sector was needed to bring it to the level right now. I would also like to thank Candy, of course, because we could launch this year in June our C4All mini-grid initiative, also to upscale, to replicate achievements. And of course, also my thanks go to Mr. Amin for having, being able to organize the IREC conference in Manila, as mentioned earlier. Coming back to the starting point. I think it's already an achievement, Roberto, that we have an open consultation. I really appreciate it, and the private sector does that definitely as well, meaning that I think in the past very often we were waiting for the next procurement, seeing what could be our chance, our stake, but now we are really sitting here together to enable a bigger stake, a bigger development for the private sector involvement, which is certainly needed. In this regard, I think, of course, the private sector has the technologies available, cost efficient on top, as said earlier, but at the same time, sometimes we lack let's say, the slow decision-making process. What can we achieve here? I think if there is a manager in place who has the competences to work on it, I think he is the right person to streamline, to process these things in a more efficient way, not as the Commission, but rather in the way in a transparent way, in a feedback manner, that things are clear for outsiders, not for outsiders, for applicants, that they understand on what criteria, which we will discuss later today and tomorrow, they need to advance the application. I think this is so important, that decision-making process inside the institution can be advanced also from private sector perspective. Yeah, I think what is very important also to understand, I mean, we are now sitting here with, we listened earlier to KfW, to AFD, there are a number of banks here as well in the audience, and it's not financial engineering you're speaking about in a way, even though it looks like this. I mean, this is still rural electrification markets in developing countries, high risky, nascent and young markets, which means that the promise made earlier today and reiterated to electrify several hundred of millions of people, of course, is not only a task of the private sector, but of course of the public sector as well. It needs this commitment, as it was said earlier today, that we all need to continue to work on it. When it comes to the proposal itself, I think what is very helpful that we look more into countries. This is certainly an approach the Alliance does by itself. We establish what we call country scoping scouts, or what we try to do, who, on the one hand, identify business opportunities, build up networks to enable our members to reduce transaction costs, to directly see what is relevant and what is not relevant in order to, make the investment, their time more efficient. When it comes to the main challenge, I think, which is in the end, how can the beneficiary, how can the end user pay? I think this is how we need to think about here together, how to develop cross-sectoral, how to approach it, how to develop local contents, local partnership processes, how to let them participate. It's just not an export initiative from the EU Commission. I think it's really a cooperative approach which needs to be nailed into this proposal. At the same time, I think as far as I understood, of course, everybody will be interested in numbers. What is the minimum size of project? What is the maximum? Are there limits for investment in certain regions and even for certain applicants? Not all, that all one company gets it all and others have to miss out at a later stage. Within the consultation of our 90 members who represent the full value chain, while also, any size of companies, which makes it sometimes a bit difficult to talk on all their behalf at the same time. But I think what would be relevant is, on the one hand, to have minimum project sizes of about 500,000 euros, in the understanding that we want to upscale, that we want to have bigger solutions, and we don't only take the Pico solutions, not Pico system, but the Pico solution, and to see how we can group and how we can makes this all deliver this more efficiently in a way. I mean, the bundling approach was mentioned already, so there are approaches also on the transaction side to increase efficiency. What I think is also very relevant is, and that brings me from my side at this stage to the last point, Roberto, is that I think when saying earlier that transparency is a very important part, I think that we need to be clear what are the criteria and who will decide. If it's those who are mentioned here, if it's the DFIs, if it's Europe 8, if it's the ARENA, I think certainly the pioneers who were developing this market for decades and have joined here and there our alliance too, would be certainly able to help you to assess these incoming applications, to really deliver a quick decision-making process and hopefully to find out what is relevant and what is not relevant, and even to implement it very quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Please, sir.
Thank you very much. I think there's now an emerging consensus that the nascent quality of the markets for rural electrification requires some kind of innovative thinking. And I think the proposal we have in front of us represents such innovative thinking. So Electrify seems to present flexibility, both in the form of finance, but also in the type of partners who can be engaged. So I think in broad terms and in principle, that means that it's a very much a welcome initiative. It's exactly the sort of thing that needs to be put forward if the very ambitious targets for access to energy which have been put forward at international level are to be achieved. The risks, we talked about the risks this morning and the perceived risks, and I think the fact that Electrify can come in with early stage finance is a very important signal to the market. I think it would be interesting to discuss how the initial stages of the Electrify proposal might develop. You mentioned the national and regional programs. I think it would be interesting maybe to hear more about that. But I had a couple of general points I'd like to make about the proposal, because that was the task you set us. And the first point I'd like to make is that while innovative finance for rural electrification is a necessary condition for achieving rural electrification, it's certainly not a sufficient one. So we heard this morning very clearly from the private sector the need for conducive policy and regulatory frameworks. We've heard this morning, and also clearly on the panel from Kande and others, the need to really engage with this entrepreneurial capacity in Africa and other developing countries. And I think there's an important potential for the EU, with much of the technology and the technical expertise, to engage and partner with African entrepreneurs. But I think in some senses there's a need for a proactive approach to encouraging that to happen. And then at the very ground level, we've heard also there's a need for skilled technicians for installation, for operation and maintenance. These things can only happen at the ground level. And currently the private sector is saying it's one of the risks, not the only risks, but it's one of the risks that we face when engaging in rural electrification markets, that these trained technicians don't exist. So the general point I wanted to make is that I think we need to look here at an ecosystem approach, or a systematic approach. It's not just a finance question. Finance is essential, but we need to look at the other key points to make this market move. And in that sense, I wanted to raise the issue of complementarity. And I wanted to do this I'm talking now about complementarity of donor instruments. I wanted to raise that for two reasons. Of course, then there's the efficiency reason. The whole should be greater than the sum of the parts when we're talking about inputs from donors. But there's also the difficulty of local partners engaging with the plethora of donor facilities and programs which exist. So one of my pleas would be for us to talk about some mechanism to make it easier for people on the ground, the people who we think are going to be developing projects, to navigate the rather complex system which is emerging. It's a very good thing that energy has risen up the political agenda, and one of the results has been the emergence of new instruments, but I think it's very important to achieve some kind of complementarity. I'd also like to say a little bit about capacity development and relate that to the program on which I'm working, which is the Africa-EU Renewable Energy Cooperation Program, which focuses on this system-wide approach. So providing policy support for conducive policy and regulatory environments, providing active and proactive engagement with the private sector. I think one of the barriers, which maybe hasn't been talked about enough, is lack of access to market information. And that's one of the things the RECP can provide. There's also active matchmaking between African and European private sectors. And there's facilitating these links with the existing programs which I mentioned. But finally, and I think critically, there's building capacity on the ground. And that includes the skilled technicians, but I think it also includes institutions who might have the capability of bundling projects together. We heard this morning and this afternoon, one of the critical factors in the game, we're talking about rural electrification, is the relatively small size of the project and the difficulty, in particular, for the senior debt providers to engage with projects of small size. So there's a need for bundling, there's a need for aggregation and maybe securitization. The big question is, who's going to do that? So I think here we're talking about institutions and the institutions with the capacity to undertake those kinds of activities. I'd finally just like to make a very quick plug. I know this is against the rules, but outside you will see one of our latest publications, which is called the Mini-Grid Policy Toolkit. And this deals very explicitly and in a very practical way with operator and business models and the appropriate policy and regulatory actions that are required for the different models which will emerge, I think, as we see Electrify move forward. So we welcome the initiative and thank you for the opportunity to discuss it.
Thank you for breaching the rules of the game and doing unauthorized advertising. You will be properly punished later. Please, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'd like to reply just from my particular perspective. I think my esteemed colleagues have, there's certain threads that, I cannot improve that much on. But I can reply to this as somebody who's been in the energy sector in South Africa for the last 10 years, also in the CDM markets, and who before that was a lawyer. So if I think about this as a lawyer, then I say to myself that I managed to practice for 10 years without knowing 10% of what project finance is about. That's a reality that we have to keep in mind. Project finance is an extremely complex tool that very few people understand. It's very difficult to explain it to people also, just the whole the whole risk profile. So looking at this tool, I'd like to say that I'd like to compliment the people who worked on it. It's obviously a project finance-based approach, and I think they've done it about as best as one can. I cannot really suggest that much to improve it, but I'd like to just contextualize it as some of the others have also done. Now, moving on to being in the energy sector in South Africa in the last 10 years, I would like to assure you that miracles actually happen. You can plod along for 6, 7, 8, 9 years and achieve absolutely nothing, and then you can have a lift off and build 3,000-4,000 megawatts in 3 or 4 years with very significant community benefits. And that's what's happening at the moment in South Africa. Now, while that's very much an on-grid situation, which is more easily suited to the type of instrument that we have here, it shows that it's possible. And really, just to give you a figure, something like just over $1 billion has been set aside by the developers of renewable energy projects in South Africa to do community development within 50-kilometer radiuses of those projects. So it'll be truly transformational, and it'll really be sustainable development as we've always wanted to see it, of the people, prosperity, planet, kind. So that's possible. But then if we go back to the CDM in Africa, then we have to say that's not a miracle that really happened. A lot of us worked very hard at that, and it didn't really happen, and we often asked ourselves why it didn't happen. And it was to some extent because it was also complex, and in another respect maybe because it required lots of policy people to arrive on the same day and be present and do their work all on the same day, giving different kinds of approvals. And I think project finance is of that nature. So ultimately my question would be, is it possible that alongside this very good initiative we can launch not 1 or 2 but 5 or 10 other initiatives and see which ones work on an evolutionary type of a basis, which creature survives better than the others? I think a lot of it probably needs to be on balance sheet. In our own procurement program in South Africa, we saw after the first 2 procurement rounds how people went back to on balance sheet because it was cheaper, it was simpler. I mean, it looks like it might be changing again. But then asking ourselves, who are the people who will make money if there's energy in a greater part of Africa? It's probably the mobile phone companies, it's probably the IT companies and the Googles of the world. Can we get these guys to help us also launch other programs that install things on balance sheet, that's simple, that works from the bottom up, while maybe this initiative probably predominantly works from the top down. So those are my initial comments.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you very much for having me here today. Until this summer, I used to work with the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where I was responsible for FMO's Access to Energy Fund. And I recognize a few elements in this proposal from that fund. And I think that the Dutch government is fairly proud of this instrument and finds it a very successful thing. So I'm quite pleased to be able to comment on this now from a different perspective. This summer I moved to the Global Off-Grid Lighting Association, representing a sector that focuses on the entry-level electrification of households. From the discussion of this morning, that seems to be a sector that has been slightly off the radar of the European Commission so far. And while you were engaged elsewhere, this has quickly become a sector of its own, a sizable sector with about $200 million of annual spend, doubling about every 1 or 2 years or so. The IFC thinks it's going a bit faster than we think, but we try to be conservative. Yet having reached only 4% of households. So this is a market that is growing very, very fast, and is held back mostly not by the lack of demand from customers and users, but mostly by the lack of financing that the members of our association, the industries of these entry-level electricity products, they face shortage of capital. So we've been working on that ourselves, seeing that as a main barrier. We produced a study by A.T. Kearney earlier this year, was presented in June, launched at a conference in July, and we have a series of debates where we put investors and off-grid lighting industry together in the room to discuss what are the investment gaps. Very interesting. What came out there is that there's a number of issues which are not only to do with availability of finance, the ticket size of, as they call it, the size of the investment needed by the industry versus the type of investments that are offered, that doesn't match. The investments needed are typically smaller than what the financiers like to offer. There's issues with collateral, but there's of course also issues with the cost of financing and the risk involved. So de-risking of capital is very much needed, and in that sense I really very much welcome this proposal, very much so. There's also a but, and the but is that the devil is always in the detail and in the elaboration. With the FMO Access to Energy Fund, I know it was quite successful because it was linked so closely with the other instruments that FMO could offer and the financing from other parties that they could bring in a certain deal. So I think that's important that that's taken on board here too. Keep that connection close and give the providers of that debt financing and the management of this fund, give that sufficient room for maneuver so that they can make the decisions, what are the investments they want to go into and which one are not. I heard some comments, we need a minimum ticket size, we need grouping. I would advocate, leave that to the fund manager to decide and make sure that he fits that to the kind of investments there where he sees the opportunities. And if we talk about scale, well, where can we achieve scale at the moment? I would say look at growth and how you can manage growth, where the opportunities are there. I think it's also very important that the manager, that she can speak the language and culture of the businesses involved. There are risks that are perceived risks, and somebody who knows the sector can take that away. There's also significant risk remaining, and so you want to have a fund manager that knows what instruments are there to mitigate such risks. So I like very much in the element in there in Mark Buiting's presentation where he says this should be a knowledge center, a center of excellence that really understands the sector. And I very much welcome the comment in the last bit that in Mark Buiting's proposal to support to suggest a cooperation with GOGLA and the sector to look at junior debt, because as has been said before, this is not the silver bullet. We need more solutions, and what my sector, and particularly the more established players in my sector, really need is working capital, and that's debt financing rather than equity financing. This instrument might contribute a bit to that, or depending on how it's structured. But I hope that that element of junior debt financing stays involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Please, sir, up to you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this workshop. I will be speaking both on behalf of Eurelectric, who presented this morning, as well as on behalf of EDP. Just a very quick word on EDP before I jump in on the comments of Electrify. EDP is a utility company present in 11 countries, very much focused on renewable energy. Actually, it's currently the world's third largest wind player in the world, and it has been ranked #1 utility for the third consecutive year in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. EDP's engagement in access to energy started 5 years ago. It followed a a philanthropic approach when we electrified part of the refugee camp in Kenya, Kakuma, and we have been evolving since then towards more and more seeking a financially sustainable business model. We have been delivering projects in Angola, Brazil, and we are actively partnering now with UNEP to deliver a clean mini-grid in Mozambique. So having said this, a few comments on the Electrify initiative. I would basically make three main comments. The first one is clearly a positive one. I think this is a very substantial improvement and positive in the right direction for several reasons. The first one is that the fact it clearly signals that we are evolving from an ad hoc grant-based financing to a kind of market pressure to ensure that projects are financially sustainable and that funding is repaid. This creates clearly a market discipline, a pressure for governments also to top up whatever the fee for service from clients is to make sure that there is a viable business for consumers and that we don't engage in very pervasive but wrong practices of giving electricity for free, which clearly is a dead end and doesn't create any space for viable businesses. This initiative also puts the private sector at center stage, and this is key. I believe that clearly the private sector will be instrumental in delivering universal access to energy. It is a very flexible initiative. I mean, the ratio of grant to subordinated debt conversion, the trigger of when this conversion happens, the rate that is charged on the funding, all this seems to be flexible, and flexibility here is absolutely key. And finally, the expectation that funding will start by mid-2015, mid-next year, I think is a good timing, and it's clearly welcome. Now, the second comment is that the facility seems to rely on overly optimistic assumptions on what remains still an extremely immature industry. And this mismatch could make it less effective than what would be desirable. So for example, assuming, as was in the working paper, that projects are financially sustainable, viable, so that there are sufficient cash flows to support lending and giving an IRR of 10 to 15%. That seems perhaps ambitious. It also requires senior debt lenders to sign a letter of intent showing commitment themselves, the senior lenders, to the projects. And also, I understand, requiring in some cases that the project has a PPA or an offtake agreement that clearly gives visibility on future cash flows. All these might be too restrictive to really start the lending going on. I mean, to be sure, to my knowledge, there is no profitable distributed energy service company operating, and there is a persistent gap between the willingness to pay of end consumers in the base of the pyramid and the total costs of these systems. So someone has to plug the gap. I think this initiative puts a bit the pressure on the governments themselves, either from financing this gap from their own treasuries or from cross-subsidization mechanisms between on-grid customers and off-grid customers. There are several possibilities, but the positive aspect is that this clearly puts the pressure on the governments themselves to find financially viable businesses, but we have to recognize that that is not the case in many countries, many beneficiary countries, and so What worries me is that if we are a bit too restrictive on these conditions and do not regard this pretty much as a venture capital financial instrument, we could be hampering a little bit the number of projects on the ground. Third and final comment, I think there are still some design elements that could benefit from further clarification, just a few of them. So the criteria, we understand that there is a lot of flexibility regarding this grant to subordinated debt conversion. The criteria for that are very important for us to have a light on. A possible route could be clearly to state ex ante that like overhead costs, feasibility costs, site assessments, monitoring and evaluation costs, all these would be simply funded via grant, and only the capex and installation costs would eventually be later on converted into subordinated debt. I think this could be one possible idea. A second aspect is the evaluation process. I clearly understand the logic. I think it's important to follow the template of a senior debt lender when the manager is doing the investment thesis, asking actual senior debt lenders to go and screen again that investment thesis and then sign a letter of intent to show a commitment to the project. This, my fear is that it could clearly delay the whole process, plus all the bureaucratic aspects of all the templates, financial term sheets, and so on and so on. I'm a bit concerned about what this could entail. And very final comment, the targeted projects are described as having to have quantifiable impacts on the reduction of greenhouse gases, generating energy services, carbon credits, and renewable energy certificates. From our perspective, just describing targeted projects as having these benefits is far too narrow. I think it's important to explicitly recognize all the benefits that these projects can have in terms of social benefits, health impact, education nexus, water, food, and energy nexus. If these projects have these, it clearly won't be because of marginal carbon credits that could be freed to developed countries that would make it interesting projects. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, last but certainly not least, the voice of the civic society organization, Paolo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ridolfi. Thanks a lot to the European Commission for giving the opportunity to comment on Electrify documents. As Mr. Ridolfi said, I'm coming from the NGO environment, and therefore I will try very quickly, I promise, very, very quickly, to give some comments, some ideas on the Electrify initiative, starting from my point of view. Let's start saying that the link, the very concrete link between rural electrification, development, and poverty eradication doesn't deserve to be underlined to this audience. The link is self-evident. I just remember a study done on behalf of the European Commission in 2010. The study underlines very clearly that in many African countries, the development goals will be not achievable unless substantial progress is done in the area of rural electrification. Coming to the current days and talking about the terrible, devastating Ebola pandemic in many countries, we very well know that a lot of government officials in Sierra Leone and other countries clearly state that the public response against the pandemic is seriously constrained, hampered by the lack of electrification. This is to say that we very well realize, as a representative from an NGO, that talking about rural electrification ultimately means talking about poverty eradication and social development. And personally. I have no doubt on that. This morning we heard a lot of extremely challenging and interesting speech, and I would just to take one point, if I precisely remember, if not I apologize, from Monsieur de Gromard, when he told us a point which is important, which deserves to me to be taken into consideration, that a lot of empirical studies and research tell us that particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, households living in non-electrified areas spend financially more, not less, for energy, comparing with the electrified counterparts. I would like just to mention a study done in 2010 in Kenya. The study empirically shows some data considering, for example, the expenditure, the financial expenditure, sorry, for firewood, charcoal, and kerosene. We came to a situation where rural households, not electrified, spend much more than rural households electrified. And this is an indication, of course, that should be contextualized in each different countries. Nevertheless, can tell us something about the potential future sustainability of electrified investment. There is no doubt, it has been already said by all of you, that lack of finance and lack of regulatory framework are two of the major factors hampering rural electrification in Africa. I have nothing to add to what has been already said before myself, and let me go straight to the point. I very much welcome electrified, particularly if I precisely understood the entire logic of electrify, which seems to me to be summarized in 5 points. One, there is no doubt, I've already said, that there is a tremendous concrete link between electrification and poverty eradication. So electrify is part of the overall development and poverty eradication strategy of the European Commission. Second, traditional granting mechanisms alone do not guarantee the necessary sustainability, neither the leverage impact of the schemes. Three, market-oriented investment are needed, but currently constrained by the lack of cost-sharing mechanism. If I well remember, the Electrify draft document talks about market failures to be rectified, through electrified. The appropriate financial instrument need to be put in place. And finally, the fifth point, among various assessed options, the convertible grant has been identified as the first option. If this is the logic of Electrify, I have no hesitation to totally endorse it. And I think it's something that, and I wish, I encourage the European Commission to go ahead in the detailed definition of the instrument. Just few, not remarks, advice, if I can say. One has been already underlined. I will not add anything here. It's about capacity building. What all the panelists have said before myself is 100% endorsed by myself, and so no need to waste your time on that. The second has been already also said is about the target projects. The targeted projects. We heard this morning that also Electrify is not conceived only for Sub-Saharan Africa. The main focus will be on Sub-Saharan Africa, at least during the first stage of implementation. We have perfectly realized, and even from my point of view, is perfectly endorsable, the idea that in order the scheme to be successful, projects have to provide the investor with some sort of guarantee. There should be some sort of profitability. Nevertheless, there is also a risk-sharing mechanism provided by the European Commission. Why I say this? Because I strongly believe that the real challenge is to get the right balance between financial sustainability and social and economic impact. I know very well that this is something much easier to say than to do. Nevertheless, it's a challenge that we cannot ignore. Coming to sub-Saharan Africa, I otherwise see potentially the risk to neglect, for instance, pastoral areas, where in many countries the risk associated to the business tend to be higher and the potential profitability tend to be perceived weaker. So this is one point. And the second point is about, this is not because I belong to this environment, but the document talks about civil society. And I strongly believe we have to find mechanisms to have civil society on board. Nevertheless, it seems to me that this area deserves to be a bit more detailed in the document. But this is quite somehow understandable. The first effort has been to conceive the financial instruments. Now I think it's time also to better detail how civil society might be on board. I have just two very general suggestions here, and I promise that I'm really near to end. One is the facility foresees an advisory mechanism with the participation of financial institutions, member states, and other important stakeholders. I think we should also find, you should also find, if possible, mechanism to have civil society representative on board. This is not just to give representation to the civil society. This is also to stimulate, to encourage partnerships, synergies between civil society, private sectors, government, at global and at each country level. And the other way where I see an area of potential involvement of civil society organizations, and be careful, I'm particularly referring to African civil society organizations, is in the establishment, in the reinforcement of grassroots organizations. Just to end, there is a very well done study, again on behalf of the European Commission, which is titled Public-Private Partnership in Rural Electrification Programs in Africa. I think the study was done in December 2010. And the study reports many cases of successful rural energy enterprises established through the technical assistance, the support of national and international NGOs. And in many countries, these rural energy enterprises, have been proved to be quite effective, particularly in the management and operation of mini grids, probably less successfully in the extension of national grids. That's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. Now, I think it's only proper that I try to give few answers, helping Mark. Actually, he will help me. But before, and then these are 10. So 10 ladies, please prepare to shoot. Now, I think you all received this. I hope so. But this is to answer a number of 2, 3 questions that you made. But the EU cannot do only electrify. I think, Kandi, you said that. No, this is the missing puzzle, which for poverty purposes, in my view, is the most important, but is the missing puzzle. The regulatory dialogue, when I was ambassador of the European Union, I was doing exactly that. Talking with the Minister of Energy, talking with His Excellency the President, talking with the Minister of Finance, saying, sir, madam, private investors, both from Uganda and from European Union, cannot come to invest because this rule doesn't work, this legislation does not allow. So this is part and parcel of our DNA as European Union. We are a political animal. We are not a charity organization. The European Union is a political entity. So, number one, we do a political dialogue. The example under the vision of this visionary man here, to have this joint declaration, which I renamed Win for Win, or More for More, actually, is exactly this. We identify 5 countries. We sign joint declarations with these 5 countries. I received already other 3 or 4 minister friends from Africa that called me and say, Roberto, why I'm not signing that agreement? Well, that is exactly the purpose. Spotting what are the problems in the regulatory environment to allow the investments to take place, flourish, and then expanding, connect into business, and then utilities taking place. We have to see this in an evolutionary manner. But one thing, we cannot wait 20, 30 years that the main grid reaches the poor guy in that village. I'm sorry. This is a red line. So whoever is here thinking that we can do only viable business is wrong, because unfortunately there is a lot of business which is not viable and which we must make viable. That is the challenge. If this business would be easy, I can tell you I won't be here, because they task me only for difficult things. Now, the second point is that on top of the political dialogue, which is fundamental, we are providing technical assistance, the very much technical assistance, to give these skills that you are talking about to the private sector. We have to give to government, because very, very often governments do not have the skills, the competencies to do the reforms that will allow then the investment to take place. And we invested a lot of money, about 50 million. In this room, there are many of these people that are going out and in. So I invite colleagues here to spot countries which we are in contact, to have technical assessment missions, to identify what? The investment plan under the Sustainable Energy for All, the action plan. Well, call it as you like. We have to identify a number of investment opportunities, a number of legislation actions, a number of activities and actors, investors, that are willing to team up. To come back to the question of skills, the best way to deliver skills is to twin people with people. I explain myself. If I post a technical assistance to give a skill to an entrepreneur, I'm bound to fail. I'm bound to fail. If I call an entrepreneur and twin, put together with another one, I am bound to succeed. Because that's the way that the skill is transferred, not by way of consultancy, but by way of partnership and twinning. And that is the model we want to promulgate through Electrify. So having a businessman or women, better, to propose a proposal, the proposal to be looked at with the eyes of a senior loan provider, because these are the guys, and Mark said quite clearly, you can't escape. The rules of a viable plan are very strict. But then that advice will say, hey, this business is ready to be financed. It doesn't need anything else. Very rare, very rare. They won't wait for Electrify. Second kind of business, the business is ready to go. However, the equity finance, the risk capital from the entrepreneur is too little. And the senior debt position will not chip in if there is not another equity shareholder or another subordinated position. And then we raise our hand. That's the market failure. We raise the hand. Here we are ready. If you, the bank, tell me that that project will be good if there would be that question of money, then we are willing to put the money. We have to look at the letter. I agree with you. We don't want to become bureaucratic. But a certain degree of certainty in the fact that the business is good, and we have to build transparency on that, because we are managing public money. There is my head of unit here. He's personally responsible. He will go to jail if he signs something, or rather me, both. So he has to be careful. He has to follow the financial regulation. So transparency, equal opportunities, all the rules. In spite of that, I can promise you that we will do something that works. May take a couple of months more than a private-to-private business, but we are managing public money. And public money is scarce. The very public money that will make that business viable is very scarce today. Ask the ministers of finance of European countries, and they will tell you how scarce is public money. So I want to do a first round very quickly on what you said, which is extremely valuable. And I've seen my colleagues taking notes, because there are very good comments here. On the first, I think the most important was capacity building. You said many, many times. I repeat, I see this as a way of business-to-business partnership. That's the way in which knowledge in business is transferred. However, do you agree with me that if an entrepreneur does not risk something from his or her own pocket, I don't need him, I don't need her, there must be a risk factor there. Small, I agree, but somebody must risk. For example, technical assistance. We have done 20 years, 30 years, 40 years of technical assistance. I came to the understanding that technical assistance is valued only if you pay for it. If somebody gives to you technical assistance for free, you don't give value. So when we look at that, we shall look at the entrepreneur saying, I need a marketing study. Please, can you help me? Yes, of course, we do. So there are different proposal stage, and we want to have professionals like Mark looking at the proposal. You are like, I like very much the Dutch scheme, from which this is a sort of similar model, because it is really melting public and private in the right way, in the right manner, maintaining transparency, but also keeping flexibility, maintaining open eyes and competition to all, but also giving solid business plans. This is the balance that we have to find. The civic society, Paolo, is essential. In my view, I repeated this morning, the knowledge of the local content must come from the local entrepreneur, but must also come from the local society organizations. And I include local authorities and traditional authorities. These are the people that know the people that are supposed to pay the bill for everything. So, do we need to know them? Yes. As you need to know your customers in Portugal, you need to know them. Now, with Google, they know everything about you, Jan. They know what you do, what you would like to do, what you dream. They know even your dreams. So, how do you expect these people to do business in a local villa area in Burkina Faso if they don't know that very place? And to know that very place, you must have roots there. The roots that will diminish your security cost, for example. Installations are costly. So you don't want to do a lot of solar panel installation and cables only to see in the night that robbers will steal everything. If you are respected in that community because you have been running an hospital for the last 20 years, nobody will steal to you. If you have done good to the people will give back that good to you. That is the purpose of knowing the people. Not charity, but solid business assumption. Now, aggregation has to be studied. We want to lower bureaucracy, certainly. We want to have this holistic approach. And the regional markets are very, very important. There is a gentleman of NEPAD in the room. We are working with the African Union Commission in the European Union, African Union partnership. That is fundamental for this kind of talking. I see very much a regional aspect of domestic rural electrification. Why? Because the problems are very, very similar, and they can be grouped in different regions, for example, in Africa. I do really thank you for the welcoming words, because more or less, we have selected these people because they were going to say good about our proposal, of course. But that is part of the game. We are not in competition. It's not a beauty contest. It's not. In fact, I would like to find a sort of working relation with a fund that you well know. I would like to get DFID. They announced a 75 million pounds action. We need to sit down. There is space and there is work for everybody. That's what Kande and Ban Ki-moon are saying to us. There is such a big need that we shall not fear problem of overlapping. The work of all of us is needed today, yesterday, and tomorrow, and for many years to come. So, but if we can coordinate, I think it's better, especially avoiding to offer, special conditions. That's why the grant scheme. Would you have preferred the European Commission to work in the usual manner? The call for proposals, 70, 75, 80% of grant component for an investment. Very well done, but at the end of the day, who's ensuring that that investment will expand in time? Who's ensuring that kind of profitability in terms of business that is the only reassurance of sustainability. In this case, I think we all agree that sustainability needs both the local knowledge, the social aspect, the social managing capabilities, but also a lot of business capabilities in order to go on. Mini-grids is not the only solution. On REP that you mentioned about the EIB, REP must work for Electrify. I want to be clear on this. REP is a financing that the EIB has put on. It's a good idea. It's in fact a technical assistance, something to aggregate projects together, something to get projects and then sending to the best appropriate platform. And I think, as you spotted correctly, the market failure between 1 million or 500,000, as Marcus said, to 10 million, that's the area where public money must concentrate the efforts, because that's where we are going to reap the biggest benefits. In this area of investments, small is not beautiful per se, but is a necessity of life in this kind of business today. Let me continue quickly to address. We don't want business as usual, otherwise I would have asked my colleague to launch a normal call for proposals, like the one that we launched 1.5 years ago, which are delivering, but we want to go a little bit beyond that, and we want to become much more sustainable. The 75 million are the first tranche. They are getting from the global program, but we want to have money from East Africa program, from Southern Africa, West Africa, Central Africa, and of course from the intra-ACP envelope. So depending on the way we scale up and we start this program, we are ready, as European Commission, to beef up with a lot of grant component this important business very, very soon. It's important, the criteria. These are fundamental. Without these criteria, my head of unit finance and contract, who is in the room, will not assign for me the discharge of responsibility, because transparent criteria is bread and butter for our business. We shall not make it bureaucratic, but must be very clear from the beginning what and how and why we are financing things. Let me go to concrete. I think that the local partners, international partners, is a little bit the bet. And that's why a lot of European businesses have been solicited through Euroelectrics, but also through ARE and through other contacts. Because we believe that European business people can bring an added value to this business. I have nothing against the Chinese doing rural electrifications, but how many schemes organized by Chinese have you seen in Africa so far? I haven't seen many. What I mean is that the area is so difficult and so public-private interconnected that you won't see immediate and fast investment by the new actors and players in this business. I would like to thank the colleague from South Africa, because when you say that project finance is very difficult, at the end of the day, it's only about money. So yes, it's difficult, but they try to present even more difficult so that you and me, we don't understand. At the end of the day, what we want to have impact. So I'm very much in line with Paolo. I mean, our mandate, politically speaking, is poverty. It's not electricity. It's poverty. So we see that investing in electricity, we have a multiplier effect in agriculture, in agribusiness, in mini and small enterprise, microcredit creation, and so forth. The center of excellence idea is exactly delivering the right technical assistance in the right moment, but linked to a project, not in a sort of rainy manner. But when is needed, in that project is needed, that particular expertise, then we shall deliver. So we can't see the initiative as an initiative delivering skills. But by delivering finance, we shall also associate the right skills to make that financial support viable, sustainable, and successful. I'm going quickly to conclusion. I would like to thank very much the colleague from EDP. Yes, we place the private sector at the center stage. Yes, indeed. But we are asking the private sector also to do that extra step, as we are asking the EDFIs to do that extra step. We are willing to do 2 extra steps, but you have to do 1, and you have to do 1. I mean that because without this commitment to do an extra effort, to say, okay, until yesterday I'm financing only 10 million, below 10 million is peanuts. Well, please consider up to 5 so that we can help. Maybe we will bear a little bit of transaction costs which go with dealing with smaller business. Our mandate is to open up, our mandate is to expand, so we will certainly do that. Are we over-optimistic on a still very mature industry? Yes, yes. Who is not optimistic in this room? Everybody's optimistic. Are we bound to be optimistic in the work we do? I think so. But that means that we are fools. I don't think so. I think that being optimistic is a way of seeing the market solicited by a pulling mechanism rather than just waiting what happens. And that's what we are doing. We are pulling. We have an example in the pharmaceutical industry. We have put up a system which has created the demand, which has then generated the going down of the prices. That's what we have to do. Let's try to exert a pooling system in the market, covering some market failure so that the market will then function much, much better. I don't want to monopolize, so I will conclude here. Yes, we shall use a template, because with templates we guarantee the transparency of the process, but the templates must be slim, must be very, very efficient in terms of bureaucracy. And last but not least, I think that we need to detail a number of details. I got already some notes. Mark and the other colleagues also noted down something. We have to detail this proposal and make it work. And yes, the manager must be a slim organization with an advisory board, steering committee that will decide where the public money eventually should go in this format of convertible loan, and that must be transparent to the accountability and the transparency principles which are of the European Commission, with the Court of Auditors, with the European Parliament, and so forth. But now it's time to me for shutting up and just listening to more and more interesting questions, more interesting inputs. But perhaps my intervention was useful so that I clarified already some point. This scheme, I repeat, is inserted in a logic of a number of other interventions. The blending, we are financing 45 billion of big investments in energy through the blending facilities. We have put down 55 million euro of technical assistance to assist governments to look at the situation. We have financed already a call for proposals, actually 2 calls, one for fragility countries and one for other countries that are delivering contracts and are serving about 3 million people getting access. But we want and we need to do more. You have listened, 500 million President Barroso, 300 million President Obama, 100 billion German Chancellor. I don't know if that 100 billion is within the 500 extra. So we are at 900. We need another 100 million. So, and we have done a very quick calculation. At the rate of call for proposal that we were looking, as EU, for doing that 500 million, we would have needed 25 billion. Now, I have only 4 billion, so I have to be creative and try to leverage money. Cande, I give you the word, even if you are not a female. But then it's 10 questions from the floor from girls and women. Thank you.
2 comments. I was the one who spoke the least. 2 comments. Tutu was asked recently, Archbishop Tutu, why are you so optimistic? He said, I am not optimistic. I'm just a captive of hope. So here what we are having is we believe in a better future, and we believe that these instruments will yield energy entrepreneurs that will make energy poverty history. So we're not too optimistic. We're just hopeful that we can create those markets. But I want to emphasize what Adnan said. To make this work, we must reduce the transactions cost and the delays. We need to move fast. These entrepreneurs will be taking risks in markets that are not formed yet. We're asking them to experiment. If we delay the processes because of administrative issues, we'll kill that initiative. I just wanted to underline that again, because sometimes the delays are too much. Not only, I'm not talking here EU, it's back to the complementarity issue. We know others also want to put up facilities. Adnan has one, DFID is going to have one, you have one. The Americans are also looking at beyond the grid. We hope indeed there will be complementarity, but that the transactions cost will be reduced. We're not saying to the entrepreneurs, cut corners, but we're also saying to those of us in the bureaucracy and the machinery that don't make the good be the victim of the perfect.
So, now the floor is yours. Yes, madam. You don't look like a woman. Yes, madam. 10 women, and then the men can take again something.
Thank you very much, Dana Rishankova from the World Bank. First of all, thank you. I've been working on small-scale renewables and off-grid electrification most part of my life, and I think this is definitely a missing piece in the puzzle that is needed, and I really appreciate it. My only comment is related to a slight concern that my experience has been that when we mixing grid-connected renewables and off-grid renewables, the off-grid usually loses. Because when we think about the complexity, when we think about riskiness, while small grid-connected renewables in Africa are difficult, off-grid is much worse. And so my plea would be, as you start working on those details in terms of the eligibility criteria and the fund manager incentives, to understand well what the off-grid projects need, what are the different characteristics other than the grid, and make sure that that is reflected, and that the level playing field is created, or maybe the incentives are even skewed more towards off-grid. Otherwise, my fear is that the risk will be, once the fund manager is there, the obvious that the incentives will be to show success, to disburse quickly, and we might lose an opportunity to actually support the off-grid markets.
Thank you.
Actually, my second.
Second?
I have second comment, and for the sake of transparency, I must say that we tricked you a little, because this comment actually comes from this gentleman, but he was afraid that he will be discriminated against as a man, and so for the sake of gender equality, I'd like to raise the comment.
Corruption.
I think the comment is related, and I actually also agree with the comment, and the comment is related to some of the discussions on affordability. And I think his comment is that while this is useful, we have to think about also developing solutions or supporting those business models that allow people to pay small amounts over time, because it's not so much that the off-grid solutions are not affordable, it's the upfront cost or sometimes even the monthly cost, monthly invoices that are not affordable. So as much as we can support expenditures matching what people are used to pay for kerosene, I think much of the affordability issues can be taken care of. I hope I haven't misrepresented it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I see a nice lady here, actually too, but this is unfair, eh? This is unfair, what you have done. Andrula.
Hello, Andrula Kaminara from the Commission. I'd just like to clarify that the panel not having women not only missed on beauty, but missed on additional brains. So just to clarify.
We knew that, we knew that.
One question, it is forecasted that in the next years, at least 12 African countries will be net exporters of energy. How do you suggest that this initiative takes on board that fact? Should they give positive points to those countries, negative points, or should it be relevant? Thank you.
Thank you very much. You, madam? There is two, yes. Thank you. then another 2 on this side, and then we take 5 women on that side. Yes, you have to suffer.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the chance to raise a question and also have some comment on that. Firstly, I heard that this scheme, financing scheme will be given the priority for Sub-Sahara. So if that have an opportunity open for Southeast Asia country or South Asia country, because where in this area we also have a lot of community and thousands of people who do not have a electrification access. Secondly, my comment is that I have the feeling that this financing scheme will put a lot of focus and pay attention for the private sector, and we do not see clearly how the civil society and the local group can be engaged and participate in this process. And we really want to see in the coming year or in the next year, so a framework or a step for this stakeholder engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. Here in front, thanks. 4, and then I take another lady. Another lady, no, you got this morning. That lady over there.
Okay. Thank you for the floor. It's about new players in the electrification value chain. I think that's what we need to bring on board, and Dr. Kande Yumkela pointed out it is a high impact opportunity. The capacity building is very important. That's what we have within our program, Mamas for Mamas, which is the program that I'm leading within the UN with Dr. Yumkela and within the C4All practitioners. And also, we need for our next generation to make them renewable energy native, like they're using mobile phone now, that within the next 30 years that they will say, no, what are you doing? You're using kerosene, that's not good. That they start using solar lanterns to make their homework, and step by step, we need to focus on our seeds. And education is really key. That's what we said. And also pay attention on the standards, because sometimes the standards that our products need to fulfill is coming from the Western countries, which doesn't send the heat and the dust. The Mamalites product that I'm the designer, we have a brand, a standard called Quality Sun, who really take care of that. That we want to have it on your framework is very important. So that we're very grateful also for the initiative. It's good that you're doing it. It's easy to give a criticism, but we are here to make the input. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That lady over there. That lady. Then these are 5. Then we take another 5. But you ready to shoot? You got good questions? Who's got good answers in mind? Mark, including you, you can answer. Please.
Yes, I'm Francesca Oliva from AVSI. I also come from the civil society and wanted to maybe add a couple of more points on the role that civil society could have in rural electrification. I think maybe it has not been mentioned that civil society can have a role in demand creation, because we are the ones that work with the local communities to empower them to improve their economic well-being, to boost income generating activities. We also work with local businesses to try to give them the technical skills, but also the startup capital to grow. And this is all demand creation for electricity. Moreover, we're often an entry point to the local community, to the local authorities, and we can work with the communities to make them owning the initiatives that are introduced in their community. So I see a lot of other opportunities of collaboration between the private sector and the NGOs and the civil society. And since this program needs to be defined, it's just at the beginning, it's the first presentation, it would be really great if the European Union and DEVCO could facilitate more dialogue between the NGOs and the private sector, also because we need to start talking the same language. Sometimes we do the same things, we have the same aims, but we just use a different terminology, and we end not understanding each other. Well, I see a big opportunity here to really start working together.
Thank you. Now, before we try to give answers. Very good question. So, off-grid is more difficult than in-grid when it comes to renewables. The affordability question, this is a very important question related to tariffs. I think we have seen also in the morning question about that. Exporter of energy, shall be they penalized or favored? And then civic society. I think, Madam, your question has been answered just now from the other lady. That is, civic society can play a role. Now I invite the friends here of the civil society to send us comments in writing that can translate in incentives for the proposals to be looked at. And I'm talking in terms of sustainability. As I said before, an NGO that is running an health center is the perfect partner to run a small mini-grid. An NGO which has been providing social services for the last 20 years in that place is a perfect partner for recovery of payment or any other security issues, or indeed solidarity schemes. Let's look at the aspect of electricity as a service, as a right. Somebody this morning said it must be a human right, okay? Now, if you look at it, then you will see that in a certain village, not everybody will be able to pay, or somebody trying to pay will be in problems with the money, because we have to scale down in time this payment. So we will ask EDFIs to do not 16 years loans, but 30 years loan. Now, the question for me is how to make that as a transparent criterion into our call, so that we can factor the participation, valid participation, for a business plan of an NGO. But who wants to tackle this point? On the exporters of energy, frankly, I don't have an answer. But maybe we can have an answer from our friend Amin.
Thank you. Let me say, first of all, you mentioned that you are a political organization, not a charity organization.
Yes.
And I think that's a very important point because you're often presented sometimes as a charity institution. So in the African context, African growth is happening because of African enterprise. African growth is not happening because of people providing a little technical assistance here or there. It's a new dynamic that we're seeing, and there's endogenous growth for the first time. Now, when it comes to energy, there are plentiful energy resources, both renewable as well as fossil. Our objective is that we want to keep the fossil in the ground as long as possible and roll out the renewables now. And even with renewables, many of these countries are going to be energy exporters. That's why we have a big effort at grid interconnection and development of infrastructure for energy transmission in Africa. We're talking a lot about off-grid, which is important, but on-grid electric supply, increase and extension of grid is going to be critical for creation of a regional market to power development in the future. So I don't think that there is a direct relationship between what you're trying to do here and what you can do with the grid, because I think the infrastructure issues are much bigger.
Thank you. Any other inputs for the answers? For what concerns the geographic delimitation, as it was said, Sub-Saharan Africa is a priority out of the economic framework and the social situation. We are using this first batch of money from the general budget, DCI thematic, which covers all continents. So certainly we will also look at projects in Central America, Latin America, Southeast Asia, and so forth. But of course, the priority, also looking at the criteria that we will put, is access, where access is the biggest problem. Cande.
Roberto, on the affordability question,
yes, please.
I think that civil society could help us a lot. One of our colleagues mentioned already, from civil society, that in some countries, the poor are paying much more already. We have seen projects now where the governments are insisting on very low costs because they're scared to engage in the debate on tariffs. If our poor people in Burkina Faso are already paying between 50 to 70 cents kilowatt hour, in Liberia, 30 to 50 cents per kilowatt hour. Can the civil society help present that evidence to government? To say, look, if you have a social entrepreneur that can do a mini grid and charges 17 or 20 cents, but it is reliable, let's convince our people that this is better than paying 50 to 70 cents and then inhaling the smoke and all the associated costs. When we do it, it's as if we're trying to protect the businessman. When civil society has the evidence that this is the case, you can help us give courage so that we can begin to develop these markets. I'm not saying keep 17, 20 cents there forever, but I'm saying maybe it makes sense for the first 5 years, because we want these entrepreneurs to make money and pay the bank back. This is not charity. We're scared to engage in that debate because we've all, over the years, me included, when I was a minister, made as if energy should be almost free. We have to learn to pay for service. The same happens with clean water. In my own province in Sierra Leone, my uncle was chairing the water community group for a water plant that was put up by the Japanese. Well, he was scared to go on the radio and say, somebody has to pay for the fuel that pumps the water. The 4 guys who work at the station every evening to pump the water need to be paid, because he didn't want to tell the community they should start paying for water. Clean water is not free.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much. And besides, if in town you pay 20 cents, and in the rural areas you have to pay 30 or 40, and the alternative is not having any electricity, I think we are still going for the 30 or 40 cents, if that allows then an economic trickling up to take place. Sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. What I want to add here is that just the cost of electricity is one element, but the much more important question is what's being offered to the people. It's very nice if the electricity is not very expensive, but if it's not there, then it's just not affordable. With solar lanterns now costing about $10, a solar phone charger about 25, and a small solar home system between 50 to 100 euro. That might not be the energy access that you want in the end, but it's an offering to people that that is available to them, and is just much more affordable than what they have at the moment. So I strongly want to support and underline the comments made by Ms. Risankova there in the corner, to not forget the off-grid. It indeed has different risks than the on-grid, but it is a sector on its own.
Thank you. I know that the 2 or 3 of you want to intervene, but I would like to give the floor, and then you will take it up, whatever has been left unattended. So I see a lady here and a lady over there. You don't look like a lady. That makes 2, 3, 4 lady. I need a 5th one. And then you can talk. Please.
Yes, I'm Christina Ibsinger, and I'm a senior advisor to Sustainable Energy for All. And I just have 2 caveats that I'd like to add to the comments that the panelists, despite their gender imbalance, were quite good at. And both could be structural impediments to what I think is an excellent tool for this space. And one relates to the complete absence in some markets of project finance experience. And that is really going to be difficult as we attempt to expand beyond just the EDFI community, but also into local financial institutions. They just aren't familiar with that project finance structuring, which will make, the second comment is, a very heavy lift with many of those small-scale project developers and entrepreneurs. So while I appreciate the desire to have a lean fund management team, I think there just needs to be high sensitivity to the fact that a lot of this is quite new, and developers are just not going to speak the language. And there will be a lot of capacity building and twinning, as you called it, but the more tools that the fund manager can have at his or her disposal to work directly with the entrepreneurs, I think will expedite the ability of this instrument to have its impact. Thank you.
Thank you, and especially thank you for giving, not only spotting problems, but also offering proposals for solution. Yes, please.
Thanks very much. My name's Sarah Wykes and I work for a development agency, and we work with partners in around 42 countries. And many of the communities that our partners work with live in energy poverty. So I just wanted to come back perhaps to the development impacts and the poverty reduction impacts that Electrifit is due to deliver. Obviously, anything that can close the energy access financing gap is very welcome. But given that many speakers this morning and this afternoon spoke about the need to move beyond just providing a light bulb to providing a range of energy services in order to have development impact, I just wondered, how is that insight going to be reflected in the kinds of definitions of access that you will use in your investment criteria for projects? There's also been reference to the fact today that one key element for sustainability of projects is not just financing, but social trust. So again, I'd just be interested to know in the kind of, how are you developing methodologies, or are you going to develop methodologies to ensure that projects are designed with end users' real energy needs and wants in mind to ensure that they are sustainable? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, was the third lady, the fourth lady here. Yeah, and the fifth. Thank you. And then that gentleman there, who is insisting a lot.
Hello, Germana Canzi from REAP, a Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Partnership. We were very happy to see the draft proposal. We think it's really, really encouraging. In particular, the idea of returnable grants, which is something that REAP is also starting to look into for many of for some of our grantees. We did have one concern. REAP has identified small and medium-sized enterprises as a really crucial actor in this field. And in terms of if I remember correctly, there was a minimum requirement, sort of a minimum investment requirement of 300,000 euros, if I remember correctly. And there was a comment from my colleagues that for some SMEs that are active in this field, we have found that 250,000 euros is already actually quite a lot. So while we understand obviously there's a very clear reason perhaps for the sum that was identified, but it could also create some potential issues. So I just wanted to have some comments on that.
Thank you very much. There was the other lady over there. Yes, please. And then here, and then that lady and that gentleman there.
I'm Indira Shakya from Nepal, and I represent the NGO society here. I've been spending lots of time working with the provision of energy, and especially from the gender aspects. For me, it didn't make any difference whether women were present or not. Comparing the gender participation in the morning and now, the issues remain the same. The gender aspects in terms of cases, in terms of best practices, in terms of lessons learned, was absent even in the morning, and it's absent even in the afternoon. I believe that although you are, as somebody from the panel spoke, saying that you do at times represent yourself as a charity organization, and now you say that you are not one. Anyway, just blending the two roles that you have been playing so far, I would request that when you're developing this project, the issues of gender, especially because we have to open our eyes and be realistic that when we are saying energy for all, we are still ignoring the fact that rural population represents a larger population in most of the developing countries. And these are people who live below the poverty line, who have problems with affordability and accessibility. And the high range of standards that you will be creating in order to make any proposal effective or even acceptable is going to be a constraint for these very people in order to be embraced within the project as beneficiaries. So I would request you that when you are standardizing and setting the criteria, you look into these aspects as well, the technical as well as the social aspects. This is the only way we will be successful. Otherwise, let us not forget that we forgot energy in the MDG. And then we brought in the gender aspects. Let's not go through that same wheel again. Let's start realizing that women do play a big role. They need opportunities, they need the chances, they need the support, and they are the ones who will fulfill your goal and the objectives of energy for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Here at the center. Here, can we have the micro here? No, we can't. Oh, thanks.
Okay, mine actually is to emphasize that we need women entrepreneurs. Let it come out very clearly in the proposal how we shall reach them, because we know women are always difficult to reach. So please bring it out. The second one is please simplify so that the local entrepreneurs can access this facility. Simplify in terms of the language, but also popularize on the ground, maybe meetings like this in the countries where this is going to take place, so that people can really benefit from the facility. And please don't homogenize. There are different types of private sector. Where I came from Nairobi. When you say private sector, we think the big private sector, yet we know the country is moving very fast in small and micro enterprises.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Hi.
The last two.
So I'm again Nina Hoxha from Vestas, and this question is specifically to Mark and to the facility. It's very similar to the issue of like simplification. Have you considered maybe doing the projects, since they're so small, doing an all equity projects, or providing both project development as well as equity, and then bringing in lenders at a later stage once the projects are operational? And the reason why I say this, obviously, is because at $10 million, let's say as an average, bringing in loans or senior debt, I think it's going to be very difficult, and transaction costs are going to be very high. So maybe by having an all equity projects in the beginning, where you maybe, and then you refinance once the projects are operational and you can show that they've worked well, I think might create the sort of speed and lower transaction costs and actually have much more impact. Just an idea.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm afraid I've crossed the gender line today, so my apologies, but it's Mike
Very
Redford from
badly.
Rift Valley Energy. The one point I thought you might value as feedback as an African energy entrepreneur, we are the private sector. We do run and operate mini grids. The Electrify proposal in its current form does suit our smaller project bundle very, very well. So from the private sector, thank you. You've seen and identified a need. But perhaps the point that is more important and needs to be pointed out is that ours is a mixture of generation and distribution. Our distribution side of the business is beginning to grow quite quickly. There's a huge demand for it, and it's very much appreciated by our customers. What the Electrify as a financing tool, where it doesn't quite fit right, is on the distribution side of the business, where the financing needs are different, the payback terms are much, much longer. We've been lucky enough to be able to take a long-term view on the paybacks on it. I don't know whether you've realized that there is this disconnect between the generation and distribution bundle and the pure distribution side, but we would encourage you to think about it.
Thank you. Now, we have a small dilemma, as the session was supposed to end at 4:30. It's already 5 o'clock, but I think we can decide to go on for another half an hour, just to crash down all the issues, and then closing and giving rendezvous to tomorrow. Tomorrow morning will be exactly the continuation of this, but in 4 different groups, and therefore in smaller groups. I think we will be able, and my team will be distributed in these 4 groups. We'll be able to tackle all these proposals and extremely interesting ideas in a more systematic manner. We are taking note already. We will also benefit from emails. For example, on the gender aspects, I invite you to write to us. What should we write on this paper? what should we write? What kind of criteria we should write? That if the project is not financed by a women entrepreneur, should have a privilege. Please write down what you would like to be seen. Because one thing is saying, please consider the gender concern. Thank you very much. And the other thing is writing a criteria in legal words that I should put in the paper and make it viable. And therefore, I would like to receive this. So my proposal, if you give me a sign of consent, is to continue for another half an hour, and we finish at 5:30 instead of breaking and then coming back. At the end, we will present the 4 different groups, so I invite my colleagues to prepare for this, spelling out who are the chairs and the co-chairs of the 4 different groups. And perhaps Huma, she will say us where are the rooms where you have to go. So you prepare for this. In the meantime, I would like to hand over to my panelists for potential answer. Mark, there were a couple of questions on financial aspects. I think there was one that was saying that there will be a need of a lot of tools to work with the entrepreneurs from the startup, what you call the Center for Excellence.
Yeah, the Center for Excellence, at least the way envisioned, is supposed to work very closely from an advisory function with the entrepreneurs. So the entrepreneurs will not have to develop their own model. They don't have to write an info memo, etc. That's supposed to come from that Center of Excellence, and that need to be replicated. That's a template approach. So that debt providers as well look at the same info package all the time. So that the whole info is standardized, and therewith you can securitize at a later stage. To get back to the question from Vestas, I believe Vestas is asked their input for another initiative at FMO. So you're referring to that probably. And yes, there is another initiative thinking about making equity available during construction period and then taking it out. That is being investigated. It has some pros and cons. Obviously, you'll sell equity to yourself on the debt side. And Infraco from the UK has created a similar mechanism. And I doubt that that's very transparent. But that is being investigated. And then thirdly, yes, it's correct, FMO is involved in grants, but that's since 2004. That's from an infrastructure development fund. And what we learned there is not to convert into equity. From a commercial perspective, it creates a conflict with your own debt position. But as well from a more economic perspective, you don't have an exit, you're obliged to take a board seat, etc., etc. So there's a specific reason why this one converts into sub-debt, and why whatever I do converts into sub-debt and not in equity, although a later fund, Koen was involved in access to energy, has been continuing doing that.
A question on generation distribution type of financing?
Yeah, I fully agree. This is a generation model, and the distribution it can be added, and you can add a surcharge, and you can have that distribution component out of the project cost financed through the facility. That's possible, and you can only then the distribution have paid back over a longer time. I believe that's the purpose of the facility as well.
We will study that. Mr. Wieman.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, just a quick note from my side on the quality issue and the standard issue. I think that was raised numerous times as well. I mean, I would start with a statement saying, look, we are speaking about energy access, which means we are speaking about people who have energy access for the first time in their life. So we need to get it done properly from the start, otherwise it's a bad experience and they will never want to get engaged with us again. So this means as well that we need to not only to think about the least cost option, I think that was a term which was used a number of times today as well, but rather to look at the right quality, which might be a bit more cost effective or raise a bit higher cost, but having in mind that this is then the long-term and sustainable as a solution. At the same time, I'm aware that resources on both sides, private sector and public sector, are very scarce. In this regard, we are also trying to help to map. So when I mentioned earlier that there is an HIO, which is a high impact opportunity, which was launched in June this year at the C4All Forum, the first one. This aims to first identify the donor activities worldwide, here only on mini-grids, but that could be done on other topics as well, and as well those projects which are done by practitioners worldwide. What does it lead to? That leads to a big map where we see, look, what money flows in what countries, and what, where possibly more money and more activities should be directed towards. I mean, we earlier said, what are the main regions? Is it sub-Saharan? Are these other countries? And I'm sure that this tool will help a bit, but this is of course very dependent on your all support. So if you, if you want to engage with us or with the United Nations Foundation, or we cooperate, C4All anyway, to get engaged, to bring in your expertise, then we will have a good results on that and ready to help, the public sector to work, in some way more effectively in a way. One more point in this regard, I think very often I hear how to find the right partner, how to cooperate. I'm small, I'm too big, I miss that competence. In this regard, please be also aware that the Alliance has a so-called weekly alert where we tell all our members and relevant stakeholders about upcoming project opportunities, and that might be always also a help when you prepare some applications or when you get engaged with the Commission to bring your expertise to the level what Mark was looking for and he explained earlier. Last point, maybe a bit of an outlook from my side, but I know tomorrow we will meet again. But of course, Roberto, I would be glad to hear if you plan another workshop at some stage to see if we look a little bit back in a year's time, what we have achieved in a way, and maybe even to help in the meantime smaller companies in them by some support on missions to really get more involved with you, with us, and therefore identifying business opportunities where they can identify also the right partners, which obviously is not always very, very easy for smaller companies especially. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we shall launch one workshop of monitoring of the initiative 1 year after the initiative will start. So as soon as we manage to start it, let's say April, May, then 1 year from that date, we will certainly call a workshop like this to take stock of what's happening. But I would like to have workshops in the field. In each and every village, we have a workshop and we light on the light and say, okay, we have done it. Yes, please.
Yeah, just a quick comment on two of the points that were raised. On the affordability issue, clearly we have an issue of tariffs, and we have an issue of raising incomes and productive use and so forth. On the productive use side, we have some experience. But on the issue of tariffs and affordability, willingness to pay, I think there's a need to be very specific about particular geographies and particular sectors. And this is this is something where the RECP, the Renewable Energy Cooperation Programme, will be providing very specific market information, which I think currently entrepreneurs are lacking. So it's one of the barriers to entry to the market, that it's very expensive to gather this kind of information. And I think it's important that it's very specific to geographies and particular sectors. That's my first point. My second point was following on from Marcus's point on local institutions. And we had a question about we need new players in the electricity value chain. Yes, of course we do. I mean, the rural electrification market at the moment is very nascent. There are very few institutions and market players around. But I think we can here focus on some existing value chains. So it may be, for example, in agro-processing, there are some institutions on which can be built. There may be women's groups, so that women entrepreneurs can engage more in these markets. But I also take the point that few of these players will have experience in project finance. And here's where the twinning of the partnership comes in. So twinning between experienced European players who experience with project financing and players on the ground, maybe working in other sectors. I think this partnering or twinning approach is very important. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Paolo wanted to intervene. Can you pass on the micro? Sorry. Sorry, you want?
At the same time.
Does it work? Sorry, does it work? Okay, now it works. Thank you very much, Roberto. No, really just less than a minute to say that, first of all, I think we all welcome very much your proposal to submit in writing ideas, suggestions. This is something that we will certainly do from our side. And another point, His Excellency was making a very important point. He was talking about potential role of social enterprises. He was asking, could you, as representative of civil society, NGOs, organizations in each country, indicate which good social enterprise, reliable social enterprise, might be on board in this initiative? My answer is certainly yes. Of course, this would require to have some sort of mechanism for a sort of policy dialogue at national level, with the stakeholders at national level. Because in principle, I would say yes, I would answer certainly yes to the question raised by His Excellency. Nevertheless, obviously, this is a matter that needs definitely to be contextualized country by country. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, we continue, but before, I wanted to make an announcement. On the 3rd of October, which is Friday, we will have the first private sector, civic society, European Commission dialogue, structural dialogue. This is the policy forum for development, declined after the communication on the role of the private sector in development. So this very Friday, we will be holding the first dialogue here. Now, like the structural dialogue in the policy forum, this dialogue that starts in Brussels will then be done at regional level and at national level. So, in a number of countries is already happening. I invite organizations to alert your partners in each and every country to just put this energy access on the agenda. It's not up to me to go to Kenya and put energy access in the agenda of the local dialogue between the civic society and the European Commission, which is happening already, as I was doing in Uganda, and the team is indeed very, very appropriate. The time is also right, because we are starting now to get the same language. Private sector and the civic society starting to converging on the language, eliminating a little bit ideological barriers, and see where you can work together, where you cannot work together. That is fair enough to say. And that is going to happen. It's not easy, but we started the process. Please.
Thanks. Just 2 points regarding the roles of stakeholders in this, just to emphasize what's already been said. I don't know if Christine is still around, but the idea of more tools for the fund manager. So I think we feel that really we should only recommend direct funding when that's really needed in the process. So really the fund manager is well placed to help get the project developed and get it financed in the right sort of way. And involving the fund manager in the selection of the right projects, reducing the transaction costs, it's almost a way of motivating the fund manager. And perhaps some sort of performance-based compensation, maybe even something to consider to make sure the fund manager is part of that process. The other point that was raised, I think, in the earlier questions, which I'd like to just emphasize from our side, is the role of civil society. And we equate this, in many ways, to understanding the customer, which, if we're looking in the commercial world, is the first step for any market development. And therefore, the whole issue of affordability, we can talk about affordability, but what does that really mean? What are the current levels? We mentioned the sort of kerosene equivalent, but what's the value of having some sort of clean energy access? Education is a key part of that. But just to say, we need to be driven by those customer needs, and maybe that is a point that needs to be taken into account for Electrify in any sense. Should we have and include an assessment of the customer, the local customer demand? So we actually know that we are trying to meet a real demand as opposed to an invented demand which we may not be aware of. Thanks.
Thank you, Dean. Indeed, very appropriate. I invite you to craft a little wording on that, because the intention is there. How we incentivize this? Do we make compulsory? In my view, functional to the business sustainability is a study of the local customer. So you must show in your proposal that you want to invest in Rome, and you must know the Romans, because you know that at a certain level they don't pay, or they just steal electricity, or whatever local custom you can find. Sir.
Okay, I'd like to just maybe answer some of the questions that I myself raised around the complexity of the project finance, and just saying, well, in the South African case, why did we succeed? You know, why did we build a $13 billion renewable energy industry in 3 or 4 years? And surely it wasn't off-grid, so there were things that were simpler, but there were, I think, 2 critical factors that could really assist this process. The one was, before the power purchase agreement and the suite of agreements was finalized, there was an off-site meeting where the person in government who was responsible invited all the banks, and they all went somewhere for a weekend, and they said, is this bankable? Now, my sense is this has already been done at the level where this has been designed. So that takes me then to the second critical success factor, which is that same person who was a real champion for renewable energy and was a woman chair, by the way, went around and got a very detailed legal opinion of each and every legal requirement for a project to succeed. It ultimately came to something in the 20s. And then went to each and every official and said, you have to do your job by that day. You have to be ready because all these other 23 people are ready. And in that way, we achieved a level of integrated permitting that ultimately makes bankability possible. Because if there's one guy who's not there on the day, the project isn't bankable. So I would really encourage that you just get that champion.
Thank you very much. Let's hope to have alternate people so that we don't run that risk. But if you are in agreement, I would launch the last session of questions from the floor, and I will start from a lady. But even men are allowed this time. Eh? We shall do a mix. Micro here. I have a lot of colleagues working on the logistic, but yes, please. Here, the center. Thank you very much. I think you can also start giving the micro on the... Yes, please,
Thank you.
madam.
So my name is Isabel. I cannot say the same as you that I have a lot of years working in this field. I work for the Portuguese Renewable Energy Association, and I used to work for the European Renewable Energy Association. But I have enough of providing renewable energy to people who already have access to energy. So now I want to provide renewable energy to people who actually don't have access to any type of energy. And my question to you is, because most of your financing is directly into projects, so I'm wondering if you also considering financing national focal points. So I'm currently setting up a renewable energy association of Portuguese-speaking countries. It could be any other countries. It's just because I speak Portuguese, and there are a lot of these countries who need access to renewable energy. And why is that so? I've heard today that we need to put together private sector and civil society. I'm just picking up things that I've heard. That we need to organize workshops on the field, that we need to find partners, which sometimes is difficult, that we need to raise awareness to governments and show them the business models and why is it still viable and competitive to have renewable energy, and we need to bring energy to policymakers' agenda. So why not also financing national focal points? And I wonder how many renewable energy associations there are in these countries. Thank you.
Thank you. I asked my colleagues to invite people bringing money, but it's fair enough also for people asking. No, I think this is a valid point. We shall consider it. There is a gentleman already with a micro there. Yes.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Paul Mbole from Norwegian Chartered and working in Kenya. And I think for us, I think first of all is to appreciate the presentation and also the concept. We think it makes sense. We've been involved in community energy provisioning for the last 6-7 years. And I think for us, this sounds like something that we could engage with. I think for me, the big concern I have working with civil society is the whole question of how do you realize the value that community-based organizations have generated in terms of social capital, in terms of, we heard from the professor about the risks that are included in terms of payment. Indeed, if we are, as community-based organization or civil society, being instrumental in trying to ensure payments, then that ought to be in one way or another captured in terms of the equity. How do you capitalize that as social equity? How do you reflect that in the analysis? So the question would be then, as we think about the financial modeling and the criteria that is put in, how do you think about the whole question of social equity, and how do you capitalize that so that our role as civil society, as community-based organizations that have invested 20 years building credibility can actually be seen as a value? And that means that then brings a more concrete role for civil society. But secondly is on the bundling. I think the whole question of an intermediary at country level, for instance, and I like the presentation by Molly when she talked about IDCOL. I'm wondering, could it be possible that could also be the financing mechanism at country level, which then allows the different players, be they technology providers, financial senior donor funding partners, and even government regulatory engagements, that you can then be able to work with that through such a mechanism. That could be something that you could think a bit about. Our hope was that the rural electrification authorities could provide that kind of avenue, but I don't think that has really delivered the kind of input and support that we need. Thank you.
Thank you. You put the knife in the wound, didn't we? Now, we go on this side. I have this gentleman. Sorry, you wanted to intervene? No? Yes, the micro. I can't reach there. Can you pass the micro to this gentleman and that gentleman? Yes, please go on.
My name is Nico Peterschmidt from Inensus. We are a mini-grid company in Senegal and Tanzania. Thanks to support of the European Commission, actually, we are implementing a 60 million euro project in Tanzania right now, and we're approaching financial close there. So this question is actually about transaction costs. Transaction costs can appear on the project developer side or on the bank side or on the financial side. The transaction costs on the project developer side are mainly determined by the fact that none of the financiers wants to put effort into a project the first. So actually, if we go to an equity provider, he asks, okay, well, have you finalized the tariffs? Now, if we go to the regulatory commission, they say, okay, have you fixed the finance completely? So now, the senior debt provider is usually the last coming on board. Now, if I hear that you want to have a letter of intent from a senior debt provider to have a look into this, who would be the first from the financial side putting effort into the project? And my inquiry, or like my wish, would be that Electrify would take the lead in this and say, okay, we are the first, really putting some effort into this project and analyzing this project to come up with an opinion about this. And then it would be easier for us to attract finance from a senior debt provider or also from an equity provider. And we could go to the regulatory commission and say, well, Electrify is already on board. Why don't you go and analyze our project and come up with a tariff suggestion?
Thank you. I understand that to all of us, we are certainly looking for the best. And the risk is always on somebody else. But I think Electrify is right here for what you say, to be the first. However, if the project is not viable for an eventual chip-in of a senior loan provider, then there is no point to start the project. The project must close to a certain financial package. So I say, okay, I'm willing, and then it's up to somebody else to say, are you willing? Then come. I will be the first one to say I'm willing, but first of all, I want to see the entrepreneur himself, herself. If there is not that entrepreneurship, there is no project. You agree with me? That must be there. Then we say, we are ready. And when we say we are ready, we say at the same time that the senior debt holder analyzes the situation and therefore may decide, okay, in case this and this goes through, I am in. And therefore you should proceed much faster. Unless you want the blockage of the 23, how many people you say? The 23 steps. So we want to collapse these 23 linear steps. Instead of doing one after the other, we shall collapse all together. So from day 0, we analyze and we come and say, we are ready. We are ready. Maybe we are ready for 20%, we are not ready for 40%, and it's up to the debt position, the senior debt position, to come in and say, okay, I'm ready for, and then you see, if you square to 100 of CapEx, the project can start. If you don't square, the project still needs something, which we are willing to provide. That is the other side. So this technical assistance, in any case, this center of excellence, twinning or otherwise, shall be ready there to chip in when the project needs. Please, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is...
Sorry. Please.
Okay, I'm Moussa Doumbia. I'm private electricity service provider in Mali. I want to thank the European Union for that initiative. I think this is one of the best ideas from Europe to Africa. But my concern is about the concept. You said, let's go from grant charity to business model. Now, my concern is about the amount announced. You said 75 million euro. It seems to me that this amount is very, very insignificant if compared with African need.
Not even China.
When President Obama said, I will electrify Africa with $7 billion, we laughed. And what about 75 million euro? Even in Mali, only in Mali, in last 5 years, we spent almost the same amount of money. And what about the scale of Africa for 75 million? If you want to stimulate private entrepreneurs, I think from Europe and from Africa, of course, I think I encourage you to put more money than that.
Thank you. Read this booklet. You will find the answer. Okay. There are 4 billion grants, leveraging up to 25 billion euros. Make yourself the calculation. You know, grant is precious. Grant money is very precious money because it's exactly the money that comes first on the table and triggers the other money. Now, we are talking here of 4 billion euros doing a number of things, including big electricity generation transmission lines in Africa in the tune of 32 billion. This initiative starts with 75. I said already that we have 500 million ready to chip in when the 75 shows that what we are doing is good. And to show that it's good, we value very much your comments. Sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Frédéric Madry from Tractable Engineering. I think we all agree today that we're not looking for electrification, but for impact, sustainable development, not only from an ideological point of view, but just also as a key success factor for our business models. So I was wondering whether in the Electrify initiative, how this impact is going to be promoted and maximized. My opinion is that it starts with monitoring, of course, so using smart sustainable development indicators. And then, the question is whether this kind of, all the benefits of electrification, if they could be in some way monetized, like for instance, the carbon emission reductions are monetized through carbon credits, if that could be extended to other sectors based on the output-based approach. Thank you.
Thank you. I have 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Sorry? 5. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Please, sir. Let's go fast. We take note here so that we have the last rush.
Thank you very much. I think Electrify is probably the thing we've been waiting for all this while. And let me really commend the EU for taking this step. Why am I saying this? Rural electrification is not an easy thing. And this is the people in society who have been neglected for so long. Most of our people in the cities for all these years have enjoyed subsidized electricity, leaving these rural people. So the fact that the EU has stepped up to give some support to particularly the private sector to come up with this, I think that's the best thing to do. Why see the private sector? Because utilities are not interested in rural electrification. No, not of the utilities. I used to work in the utility. They gave us some, we rejected them because they don't fit into our way of operation and they are just unnecessarily expensive. So every utilities, rural electrification agencies, good, they can implement the projects, but after the project has been implemented, they are not interested. They cannot maintain those systems. This is where the private sector comes in. But now, let's look which private sector we're talking of. The type of projects we are talking of, the African, most of the private sector in Africa that is engaged in rural electrification, they are very, very small. And they will have to team up or find partners from Europe before they can participate in this. So this is just to tell the African private sector that if you want to get ready for this, get prepared. You alone cannot do it. Most of them are very small, and they will have to partner with European counterparts or come into groups to mobilize enough financing to support this. But at the country level, we have some countries that up to today, you cannot even supply power to your neighbor and charge him a penny. That's the legal and regulatory frameworks. This is where at home, we have to now start working. Such a fund exists. How can we get ready so that when the time comes, our private sector can access it and bring funds home to ensure that more people are receiving the service? So we have to work and make sure that the legal and regulatory frameworks at home is there and make it accessible for people. Then capacity building. I know capacity building is not a big issue here, but I will see a lot of similar projects failed simply because the installation was very poor. It was very poor because the installers were not trained, they are not certified, there is no way of identifying whether one installer in any country has the skills to do that installation. Yes, if you put the announcement, you get thousands of people coming, but none of them can do it right. And in the end, the project fails, and they say the systems are not good or the quality was not good, but it comes from the installers. This is where we have to also look at. And the private sector, they must also get involved. You have to tell us what your needs are, the training needs of your installers, and we see how can we help get people in our countries trained enough to provide the service that you're looking for. That sort of thing. But thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. That gentleman, yes, please.
Oui, cher El Mokhtar de l'Agence d'Accès Universel en Mauritanie. Ma question, c'est d'abord que ce mécanisme est-ce qu'il vient en substitution à celui de la facilité énergie qui aura donné beaucoup d'accès, en tout cas aux populations des pays ACP, et qui aura eu également une bonne incidence sur le tarif du kilowattheure. Je parle du mécanisme de la facilité énergie de l'Union européenne pour les pays ACP. Donc, est-ce que le nouveau mécanisme Electrify, est-ce qu'il vient en substitution à ce premier mécanisme? En deuxième question, est-ce que ce mécanisme ne risque pas de contourner les agences publiques d'électrification dans les pays concernés? Et auquel cas, je pense qu'il y aura des problèmes de cadre réglementaire et que les débats devra être encore plus importants entre l'Union européenne et les pays toujours concernés. Sachant que se poseront des questions également de régulation, puisqu'on sait le problème du secteur privé, on connaît également les difficultés du secteur privé dans nos pays, comme l'a été souligné précédemment. Donc, il y a des problèmes de fond qui resteront en suspens en vue de la mise en œuvre d'un tel mécanisme de financement. Voilà, je vous remercie.
Merci. Yes, sir. 1, 2, and then was the lady on the other side. Yes.
My name is Anthony Godaro. I'm chair of the African Renewable Energy Alliance. I'm also a member of the board of the Alliance for Rural Electrification. And finally, third hat is managing director of KXN Nigeria Limited, a systems integrator. I like this proposal here, but I fear that there are two potential pools of capital which should not be neglected. As things stand, this will appeal to people, investors who want a high return on capital, even though I think that you're talking about 2/3 being your requirement for this proposal. But the two potential pools of capital I see are, on the one hand, the numerous number of people above the age of 65 in development countries. Just think of Germany, where the number of people over the age of 65 exceeds the number under 15. And you twin that with, say, a developing country like Nigeria, high population, where 40% are under the age of 15 and very few over 65. Now, a lot of the Germans, just take that as an example, have solar roofs, so they are convinced of that. It is also a fact that solar panels produce 50% more when they're installed in Africa. And I think it's also a fact that many Germans, and to a lesser extent other people in Europe, invest for reasons other than financial return. One of them being the need to make an investment to do something about climate change. And if they're allowed to make these investments, they might accept a lower rate of return. The other pool of capital, of course, is combining have-nots, so that the communities in Africa, and I think of Nigeria, localized where these projects can take place, can pool their money. And that's effectively done these days using mobile network with smartphones and phones, little amounts of money, and crowdfunding. So in short, I think you should think about how this fund can support both the enlightened people in Europe above the age of 65 who wish to make a contribution for future generations against climate change, and also, on the other hand, the local African communities who want a system in their locality and want to combine small amounts of money effectively. That's my contribution.
Thank you.
My name is Aaron Leopold from Practical Action, and Practical Action has done a lot of work over the recent years defining energy access and the meaning of energy services for poor people. And one thing that Electrify does is talk about higher levels of access with mini-grids enumerated specifically. And there's been a lot of talk about mini-grids in the international community, but when we saw the presentation, the bottom line was that it is expected that most of the investment will go into solar lighting and mobile charging, hence the collaboration with Gogla, which is of course necessary, but is not sufficient to achieve a level of access that we should be talking about here as our aim. And I wanted to make sure that the Commission recognizes this discrepancy between the document that it sent around and the presentation of the realistic financials that we were presented this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I will give to a lady here on the left for the last question from the floor. Then I will ask the panelists to go a quick round, and quick means quick, and then we try to wrap up. Madam.
Thank you very much. I would like first to thank the European Commission for this interesting initiative. But I am wondering if there is some intention to establish contact or build partnership with some regional institution, like, for example, the African Center for Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy based in Praia, because such center can have already their roadmap to develop the rural electrification. And on the other...
Micro. Thank you.
And such a center, I would like also, they might have their database on the potential projects to electrify the rural area. Also, they can have database about some private investors. So I think such partnership can help the Commission, European Commission, to better succeed with this initiative. And also it can better the way shorter to achieve the objective and the targets. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will start addressing this last intervention. Thank you very much. The idea is, in fact, that after these 2 days of workshop, the colleagues will contact the different regional hubs. We will contact certainly the African Union Secretariat Commission. We will contact NEPAD people, energy. We will contact the different regions, West Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa, the energy pools with the proposal, asking their input. But we wanted, first of all, to have this workshop to calibrate better our ideas and send them around. Now, let me try to address a few questions that you have seen. I think somebody has said the value of being there 20 years for a certain civic society. This is exactly what I mean when I see a private investors looking for an NGO that has been in that place for 20 years. This is invaluable knowledge of the place. Impact, certainly impact will be looked through monitoring systems. We have signed this morning, you have witnessed the signature of a monitoring contract. In fact, we were giving money to Sustainable Energy for All to have a monitoring action worldwide, because we have to be coherent with other actions and monitor the projects in the same way. This morning, you remember the presentation of the professor was saying a conservative approach and the normal approach, and according which approach you go. So we must have a kind of a measurement system which is shared at the world level, and I think this is Sustainable Energy for All team leading on that. Now, the certification of installers. That was a very good point, and I think it goes across also the contact with regional hubs and regional centers. We want to, out of regional money, finance certification schemes of installers. That is training. Training of people in this new domain, in this new sector, so that we build the skills in African continent in order to deliver, in order for companies to find the right technicians. And we want to do this at regional and national level out of our budget. Now, est-ce que la facilité d'énergie a évolué dans cet système? Oui, entre autres, avec toutes les autres opérations que vous voyez dans les booklets qui ont été distribuées. Et oui, bien sûr, il y a besoin de beaucoup de discours et de dialogues avec les gouvernements sur l'environnement des affaires, sur les lois et toutes les provisions législatives nécessaires pour vérifier les investissements. Now, the gentleman from Nigeria, he made a complex reference to all people in Germany with solar panels and tapping into a pool of money. I would expect from you a written proposal on how Electrify can tap into that pot, and I will be extremely happy to call this kind of stakeholders into the picture. How to be more efficient in what we do. I think we have talked about a lot about effectiveness, impact, and efficiency. And the reason for us to be here, and I think tomorrow morning will be the time when we go into details, and we hope to have from you valuable inputs to this effect. Now, last round from my star panelist, please, Dean.
Well, I think, Roberto, you've just mentioned the two main things I was going to talk, so I'll brush very quickly. I mean, one was the question about there's just not enough funding, that 75 million isn't sufficient. But actually, I think the intention is to demonstrate an approach. Certainly there'll be more funding which will become available, but the key is to demonstrate what can be done to the local financiers. We've already spoken about the need to raise awareness of customers. I think there is a need also to raise the capacity of the local financiers. So I was going to say that training is going to be a key element, but training of the local financiers as well as the other stakeholders in that process. The second point I was going to make, again, you've covered, as part of the SE for All, Clean Energy Mini-Grids, the high impact opportunity there, the role that UNEP has in that, as well as developing the business models, is the monitoring and evaluation. And clearly there is a need for monitoring of this process so we can justify what we have done and put together. So the final thing I would say then is that just to put in a big request for coordination. I think we've had that issue raised several times. There's a danger that this is a very good initiative. We feel that's a very good initiative. I think most people have said the same. There is a danger that we're going to have the very good EU initiative and the very good US initiative and the very good German initiative, etc. So it's a question of trying to pull that together. But my final message is it's just very good to hear that we're moving finally from the talking to the walking. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dean. My remarks will be very short as well. I've spoken quite a few times, and a lot of other members have mentioned and raised their voice today as well. Personally, I see that the arguments came from very different directions, so the market position of everybody here in the audience seems to be, well, sometimes the same, but very often different. So obviously the market is so big that we have a lot of things to develop together, which leads me to the message to the Commission that this Electrify should be as flexible as possible, but you mentioned that definitely, Roberto. Second point is, well, I think the additional public support is needed on many things. A number of points have been mentioned. Just one which I have not heard, but maybe it was mentioned, is certainly the help on the currency risk. That should not be forgotten. A final point is I purely think that this is a very nice initiative to exchange, to have transparent ways of exchange, and well, whoever wants to walk his or her arguments, especially her argument, through ARE to the Commission, I will be open to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will respond also very briefly to 2 points. Firstly, we heard in the latest round of questions again the issue of the importance of local institutions. We had a question about the need for national focal points. I think it's useful to reflect on the role that the renewable energy business associations played in the development of the European renewable energy market. And in that sense, I think I take the point that was made, or the suggestion that was made, about the importance of African renewable energy business associations. I think they potentially could have a very important role. Clearly, in many cases, they're currently weak institutions, which needs to be understood, but I think that's something worthy of reflection. The second, I'd like to react to the point made by my friend from ECRI. Again, the point about policy and regulatory frameworks, which we know, but I think the point here, the key point, is about phasing of building markets, about legal and regulatory frameworks that are necessary, building institutions and capacity on the ground. And at the stage when markets are new, it's very important to get a number of things lined up at the same time. So it's a question about phasing and coordination. With that, I share the general sentiment in the room that the initiative is very much welcome, and we at the EUEI PDF and the RECP look forward to engaging and contributing to it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, very quickly, I very much support the call for better funding of industry associations. I think it can make a huge difference. I think what people in the room share is a sense of urgency to move on this issue. I like that very much. I think the comments have been made, and I'd like to congratulate the Commission on the work. Well done.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. One observation on my side is that we've had a lot of talk about the point of the quality of access. In the SE4 target is another word that says universal, so it's also about quantity of access, and I think that's very important. You added up all the numbers. You didn't come quite to the 1.4 billion that need to be electrified. I think with a bit of well-targeted support to the off-grid sector, we might not get the highest quality of access, but we might reach the universal target. So I'd like to emphasize that point there. And if we then track that access, I wouldn't go for things like carbon, because the global tracking framework is working now on very intelligent indicators to track the actual access. If we focus on carbon, it kind of suggests that the poor people with the emissions of kerosene lanterns and clean cooking are causing our global warming, and I think that would be rather perverse. And then more funding, the 75 million, if it's not enough, if there's more funding coming, I would say throw it after success, not just after where the biggest needs are. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Neves.
Yes, very briefly, just to say that I think it's been, I mean, the reactions to this instrument have been very positive. That's the vibes I get from the audience. So congratulations to the Commission for putting forward this proposal. And I mean, we'll be looking forward also to tap into it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Paolo.
Thank you very much. Roberto and Gianni, I think everything has been said. Of course, I'm not just concluding, but there are 4 points probably that deserve special attention because they have been underlined by all of us. The one is to get the right balance between profitability of the business and its expected social impact. That's where probably the value added of the risk-sharing mechanism lies, in making bankable projects in poor areas benefiting poor people. The second is to strengthen, the need to strengthen at global and national level the dialogue among different stakeholders, including civil society organizations, but including, of course, primarily public authority and private sector. The third is the efficiency, the issue of timing, which has been very well underlined by the other panelists. And finally, last but not least, the need to set in place a clear monitoring and evaluation mechanism and a strategy for the scheme. I think these 4 points have been probably underlined by all those who intervene, and I think need some special consideration. Thank you very much again.
Ladies and gentlemen, a big round to my panel. I am very, very pleased to inform you that after this marathon, you will have a cocktail out there that has been conceived for relaxation, but also for doing business. I do hope sincerely that NGOs and private business people will meet and will shake hands and sign deals. If not this evening, maybe tomorrow. Now, tomorrow morning, you are called to to making all this concrete. Tomorrow there will be 4 groups, and now I ask Huma to explain to us these 4 groups.
I'll make it short. I'm sure everyone's a bit tired. Before I go into the groups, I'd just like to ask you to return your headsets to the lady over there and sign out because she's got your names. Badges, kindly keep your badges for tomorrow so we don't have to register you a second time. It takes a long time and this way it'll be quicker. And for the third thing is kindly look after your personal belongings. There are many people here and you could lose them, so just be careful. So now I'd like to call up the co-chairs of tomorrow's meeting. So Felice, Leonard, and Georgios Pantoulis. Could you come up, please? This way you can, and could, let's see. So for breakout session 1, could Giampaolo Silvestri also come up to the stage? Breakout session 2, Ernesto Macias. Breakout session 3, Jan Rixon. And breakout session 4, Jean-Pierre Kedi and Guillaume Collaris. So if you could all stand with your groups.
So this is also a photo opportunity.
Yeah. You can stand in front of the chairs. If you stand in front of the chairs.
Now, the breakout session 1, civic society role to guarantee socially viable rural electrification projects. This is the title, couldn't be clearer. Who are the co-chairs? Can I? Felice Zaccheo and Giampaolo Silvestri, thank you. This is the group session number 1. So those that want to team up and go to discuss with them. The breakout session 2 is Rural Electrification as Emerging Business, and this will be led by Georgios Pantoulis and Ernestos Machas. So they make themselves visible. Breakout session number 3 will be on modalities of the proposed financial initiative Electrify, and Torsten Everbeck of my financial engineering unit is not here, but Ian Rixen is there, the general manager and director general of EDFIs. So that is the financial session. And last but not least, the conducive regulatory framework to secure a sound implementation of the business model. This will have 3 co-chairs. The first will be Guilherme Corrares of EDP. The second will be Jean-Pierre Kedi, General Director of Arcel, and Lénard Derrida, our Policy Head of Sector. So these are a clap of encouragement, please. Tomorrow morning they will be at 9 o'clock co-chairing and then reporting in plenary with us, with me, and actually Klaus Rudischauser will also join us at around 11:30, reporting for conclusion, recommendations and closing remarks. Huma.
So breakout session 1 will be in the Adolf Max room where you had the buffet today. Breakout session 2 is in the Esterel. Breakout session 3 will be here. So the finance session will be here. It will be web streamed and recorded. And breakout session 4 will be in the Versailles. So you will see the labels outside the door of the rooms. If you get lost, feel free to ask any of the hostesses over here or to ask us. So,
now, it's up to me and to all my team, Paolo Ciccarelli, head of unit, Felice Zaccheo, the deputy, and all the other colleagues in the room, to just clap to you, to your passion and collaboration today.
Can I just...
You are all invited for the cocktail. Thank you.
I just have one thing to add. Anybody has a presentation, kindly give it to the technicians over there in the corner on a USB key. Either tonight or tomorrow morning before the sessions. Thank you. Okay, could you kindly meet with your co-chairs half an hour before the session starts? So take your pick. So 8:30, 8:30.
I only received 2 presentations.